If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 40. Axel was sitting in the back of the Pelican with the other MCUs, Marines, and Taylor, who is now a chief. Taylor had risen in the ranks thanks to his close connection with Axel and his work ethic. Although Taylor was not an officer, his role held a higher level of authority than a typical chief. He consistently took on additional responsibilities beyond those of his position, but he took pride in doing so. Some other people might be a little disgruntled with the fact that they were stuck in the same place with the same person for years, but he didn't see a problem with it and carried out his duties to the best of his abilities. He has learned a lot of skills, gained a lot of knowledge, and he enjoyed his time in the UNSC, so he didn't see a problem with how things were going. When he was a first-class petty officer, he had the opportunity to become an officer. However, at the time, he declined the offer despite the potential for a higher salary. He didn't want to deal with the politics and bureaucracy that Axel often faced as an officer. But now that he thought about it, becoming an officer could allow him access to more information, and allow him to take on more responsibilities to help Axel. Sitting inside the Pelican, Taylor observed Axel sitting across from him. Axel was wearing his personal armor and scrolling through a tablet, most likely occupied with another project as usual. Admiral Taylor called. Axel looked up from his tablet. I know the first time I didn't want to do it, but after much thought I want to become an officer. Axel looked at Taylor and smiled a little since he was finally taking advantage of this opportunity. Well, Taylor, it's about time, he replied, his eyes crinkling at the corners in amusement. You've always had the potential, you know. Officer material if I ever saw one. He paused, gaze growing thoughtful as he regarded Taylor. But are you certain this is what you want, Taylor? You know well the challenges it will bring. Taylor nodded firmly, meeting Axel's gaze head-on. His determination was palpable, it radiated off him, filling the small space of the Pelican. I am certain, Admiral. I'm ready to face any challenge that comes my way. Axel nodded approvingly at this statement. That's the spirit. He looked back down at his tablet for a moment before looking back up at Taylor. Understand this, being an officer isn't just about giving orders or getting a higher salary. It's about leading your people, making difficult decisions and standing by them no matter what. I understand that, Admiral, Taylor answered without hesitation. His voice held a note of firm conviction that reassured Axel. Very well then, Axel said with a nod. I will submit your papers once we get back, and it shouldn't take long until you're going to the academy. Taylor nodded, his expression serious. Thank you, Admiral. I won't let you down. I know you won't, Taylor. Axel's smile returned, a quiet confidence that settled Taylor's nerves. He had seen that look in Axel's eyes countless times before, always directed at a seemingly insurmountable problem that Axel had nevertheless taken in stride. That same look now was focused squarely on him, and Taylor felt a rush of determination. The Pelican rocked slightly as it landed, the low hum of the engines becoming louder as they powered down. Axel stood up and secured his tablet, then put his helmet on. He then turned to August, the team leader for Spartan Team Omega. August, once the doors open, I want you to set up a defensive position around the entrance in case the Covenant try to attack, ordered Axel. Understood, Admiral, August replied, her voice steady over the COMM. The Spartans of Team Omega began checking their weapons and equipment with well-practiced efficiency, their movements sharp and precise in the confined space of the Pelican. We'll create a perimeter and maintain positions until you return, August added, her eyes locked onto the rear hatch as it slowly began to lower. Omega team filed out with their guns drawn and started setting up a perimeter. 2 more Pelicans had landed, carrying Marines and MCUs who waited for further instructions from Axel. Sergeant, take 2 squads of Marines and a squad of MCUs to assist Omega team in securing the perimeter and have the Falcons patrol the perimeter. Ordered Axel. Aye, Admiral, said the sergeant as he carried out his orders. Next Axel turned to the group 6 MCUs and 6 Marines who were standing by for order. Marines, once we open the doors to this vault, I want the 6 of you to guard the entrance and ensure nobody sneaks in behind me, ordered Axel as he noticed a lot of cliffs that the Covenant could possibly use to sneak in. The 6 Marines nodded, confirming his order. Axel then turned towards the doors of the vault and walked towards them, followed by the MCUs, Marines, and Taylor. Once he got close, he put his hand on the door, feeling how different the Forerunner architecture was to the UNSC. Axel traced the unfamiliar hieroglyphs etched into the heavy vault doors, his gloved fingers catching on the strange, angular patterns. That's when all of a sudden, the doors had opened without him even doing anything. All the MCUs and Marines snapped their attention towards the door. Taylor walked up next to Axel while observing the vault doors open. "Did you do that?" Admiral asked Taylor as he was curious as to how Axel opened the doors. "I didn't do that," Taylor responded Axel as he took a step forward into the vault. Seeing this, Taylor immediately followed him, and so did the MCUs, while the Marines remained at the entrance making sure nobody tried to sneak in. Meanwhile, Axel continued to walk into the vault, observing the structure. After a few moments, they had arrived at what seemed to be the center of the vault. Axel had noticed two light bridges already lit leading to a center console of sorts. He had seen this scene many times playing one of the Halo games in his previous life. So, he stepped on the bridge, which almost made Taylor lose it since he didn't think that they could walk on it. Still, he gathered himself and followed Axel to the center. "Admiral, what is this?" asked Taylor. "This," said Axel as he paused, "is a Forerunner data repository, Taylor. A wealth of information we likely can't even begin to comprehend," Taylor observed as Axel started interacting with the console. He obviously didn't understand what was happening, but he noticed that Axel seemed to be having a conversation with the console itself. Suddenly, a holographic figure appeared before them. It was taller than an average human and possessed an elongated silhouette. Its face remained featureless except for two glowing eyes. Taylor watched as it turned its gaze towards them, its luminescent eyes falling on Axel. "Reclaimer," the figure spoke out in an echoing deep voice. "Monitor," Axel acknowledged, keeping his tone neutral. The holographic figure tilted its head slightly, seeming to scrutinize Axel in return. "You are not like other Reclaimers." "I suppose I'm not," Axel agreed with a small smile. Taylor watched in fascination as the conversation continued, impressed by how easily Axel seemed to navigate the complexities of this alien communication. The monitor seemed taken aback at first, but then it nodded and stretched out its hands, causing a galaxy map to appear. Axel looked around for a few seconds until he found a particular planet that was glowing and standing out from the rest. Seeing that Axel had found where the map was trying to send him, the monitor spoke. "This will aid you on your quest," said the monitor. "Use it wisely." Those were the last words as the monitor disappeared, and so did the galaxy map. Taylor was too stunned to speak, but was mainly curious at the words that the monitor had said. "Reclaimer," the word kept echoing in his head over and over again as if it meant something. "Well, we got what we came for, so let's go," said Axel as he turned around to leave. But as he did, he heard someone's voice on the other end of the COMM link. "Admiral, this is Viper 1, we have incoming Covenant forces," reported the longsword pilot. "Copy, we are done here and should be leaving in a few, you are cleared to engage the enemy," ordered Axel. "Copy that, Admiral, Viper Squadron engage the enemy," responded Viper 1 as he ordered his squadron of longswords to engage the Covenant Banshees that were heading towards Axel's location. "Omega Team, prepare for enemy contact," ordered Axel. "Copy that, Admiral, we are standing by," replied August. "And Falcons, I want you to provide close air support to our ground troops." The Falcons responded, confirming his orders, while Axel darted for the entrance of the vault, followed by Taylor and the MCUs. It was fated that the Covenant would find them, and that was fine as it would give him a chance to test his suit on a live battlefield. Chapter 41. As he emerged from the vault, the sounds of battle had already begun. 3 of the Marines assigned to protect the entrance were firing their weapons, providing cover for their injured comrade being dragged to safety by 2 others. He had taken a hit from a plasma shot and needed immediate medical attention. The MCUs had already started to assist the Marines and provide cover while engaging the enemy who were shooting them from the cliff above them. It was the same cliff that Axel had took note of before, and he was glad that he placed these Marines here to cover their backs, not that they needed it, but it prevented the Covenant from just walking in right behind them and pinning them down inside the vault. Seeing Axel walk out of the vault, one of the Marines grabbed the injured Marine's weapon and handed it to Axel. "Admiral, here you go," said the Marine as Axel grabbed the gun and aimed it at the Covenant on top of the cliff. In his hands was a MA-5B assault rifle that had a 60-round magazine, an effective range of 500 m, and a firing rate of 15 rounds per second when on fully automatic. Axel made sure to put it on semi-automatic to save ammo as he started shooting at the Covenant forces on the cliff. "Once you patch him up, move him to the Pelican," ordered Axel. "Aye, Admiral," replied one of the Marines as he began to move a little faster. The plasma shot had hit him in his side, penetrating his armor and causing him a lot of pain from the heat. The soldier quickly utilized the med kit and did as much as he could. Axel, on the other hand, had activated his COMM link. "Falcon 2, I need suppressing fire on this cliff west of my position," ordered Admiral. "Copy that, Admiral, inbound from the north," said the pilot. A few seconds later Falcon 2 had appeared flying in from the north and began lighting up the Covenant forces on the cliff. "August, get Omega Team and the Marines back here, we are leaving," said Axel as the Marines began to move their injured teammate. The MCUs got into a defensive formation around the group as they began to move towards the Pelican. A/N, mistake on my part, but August is a female, not a male. I'll change the previous chapters so that future confusion will be fixed. Copy that, Admiral. Me and the sergeant are on our way now, replied August as she shot another Covenant in the head with her railgun. The crackle of the radio brought Axel's focus back to the mission, even as he maintained suppressing fire. Falcon 2, with its twin rotary cannons blazing, had sent the Covenant forces scattering for cover. The roar of their engines echoed around the rocky valley as they swooped overhead. Falcons 1 and 3 were helping the Spartans and other Marines. Falcon 3 soared lower, its nose pointed towards a group of Covenant infantry clustered together for safety. From its underbelly, rockets spewed forth and slammed into their midst, sending hot blue plasma spraying in all directions. The ground beneath the aliens disintegrated in a blink, rapidly replaced with a crater filled with the twisted remnants of Covenant troops. The battlefield was thrown into chaos. Marines and Spartans alike fought back to back, shielding each other from relentless plasma fire while cutting down enemy forces with concentrated bursts of bullet fire and the occasional grenade. Axel, still firing on the Covenant forces on the cliff, felt a sense of satisfaction as he watched the enemy units fall. The added firepower from his Falcons had managed to turn the tide in their favor. But there were still a lot of enemies force that one Falcon couldn't handle all by itself. Omega Team, status. He barked into his comms unit. "We're almost there, Admiral," came the response from August. "We've got some heavy resistance but we're pushing through." "Good, keep pushing, we can't let them pin us down here any longer," said Axel as his focus turned back to the cliff. At this time, they had already made it to the Pelican where the soldier was dragged into the back to take cover from the incoming plasma fire. "Admiral, some enemies made it down off the cliff and are heading towards your location, I'm shifting fire now," stated Falcon 2. "Negative, Falcon 2. We will deal with them, just focus on that cliff," Axel responded as shifted his focus to the 5 approaching elites. The MCUs had also turned their attention to the elites and started to open fire on them, while the Marines had provided cover fire from protection of the Pelican. The MCUs had charged towards the Covenant elite as the two exchanged fire with each other. The elite's personal shields had managed to absorb the damage taken as they drew closer. But the MCUs were not normal human Marines who could be knocked off balance, so when the elites tried to engage in melee with them, they didn't stand a chance. One of the MCUs punched one of the elite in its gut and sent it flying back despite it being much taller than the MCU. The other MCUs did similar things as one of them had kicked one of the elites, sending it falling to the ground and then jumping on top of it as it continuously punched the elite in the face until it was no longer recognizable. Axel, on the other hand, wanted to test his suit out even more, so he took on one of the elites. The elite kept shooting his plasma gun at Axel only for his shots to do nothing as it was absorbed by his suit's personal energy shield. In the suit, Axel looked at the percent of shield and seen that just from a few shots his energy shield had dropped only 5%. Seeing this, a smile appeared on his face as he sprinted at the elite in the blink of an eye. The elite saw this and tried to grab Axel only to be dodged. As he tried to turn and face Axel, he was met with a strong punch to the face, breaking his face armor in one hit and falling to the ground. Axel got on top of the elite and repeatedly punched the face of the elite. As he was doing this, one of the MCUs had approached him. "Admiral, Omega Team and the Marines have returned." Axel got off the elite and turned around to see Omega Team and the Marines boarding the Pelicans. "All right, let's get out of here then," replied Axel as he walked back to his Pelican. The sound of boots hitting the metal floor reverberated through the interior as Axel stepped inside. "Pilot, get us out here," ordered Axel. "Copy that, Admiral," replied the pilot as he quickly moved to his controls, his fingers flying across the panel. The engines of the Pelican hummed to life beneath them, vibrating through the metal floor and into Axel's boots. "Strap in," yelled the pilot as he steered the Pelican, the ship lifting off with a sudden jerk. The landscape below began to shrink as they ascended, leaving behind the devastated battlefield tinged with smoke and fire. As they moved higher into the sky, Axel looked down at the battleground one last time from the open ramp. He could see the Covenant forces regrouping already, like ants crawling over a disrupted anthill. But for now, this victory belonged to him. A/N, this chapter was meant to be released hours ago, don't know what happened but I hope you enjoyed. Chapter 42. Once the Pelicans returned to the Leviathan, the injured Marine was immediately taken to the medical bay, while Axel went to take off his armor and report what happened to Admiral Cole and see if he could send some troops to try and take back the vault. Axel had walked towards the Spartan armory, which is the place where the Spartans go to take off their armor with the assistance of machines, since it is impossible to take it off without the help of machines. Mainly due to the weight of the armor, and how it was built to be airtight to allow breathing even while in space, on non-breathable planets, and so on. While walking to the Spartan armory, he was notified that the falcons and the longswords were returning to the hangar and would arrive soon. The Spartan armory wasn't just any armory, but it contained the tools to take off the Spartan armor and store the weapons for the Spartans and provide mobile repair on Spartan armor if needed. A few minutes later he had arrived at the Spartan armory, where he was led to a designated place by the technicians who were trained and qualified in the maintenance of the Spartan armor. The Leviathan was the only ship with an entire section dedicated to the Spartans because of the designs of the UNSC ships and constant operations. Spartans usually eat, sleep, and drink in their armor while en route to their next mission or between missions. But Axel saw the need to have such a thing on his ship since he didn't want to be stuck in the armor for the entire mission. Once his armor was off, Axel walked to his office on the ship and contacted Admiral Cole. "Avia, get Admiral Cole on the line," said Axel as he sat down at his desk. "Copy that, Admiral." Getting Admiral Cole now, replied Avia as she carried out her task. A few moments later the hologram of Admiral Cole appeared in front of Axel. "Admiral Cole, I have something to report from my mission." "Axel," Cole replied, as it was just the two of them around, so he called him by his first name instead of Admiral Woods. "What happened on your mission to the surface?" Axel clarified, "We came across a Forerunner vault that held a map pointing to another colony called Arcadia. However, as we were leaving, the Covenant attacked us. We believe they had tracked our pelicans. We're not sure if they were aware of the location of the vault before, but now, they are, so I intend to go to Arcadia soon and uncover why the map pointed us there." "Interesting," Cole replied, his holographic image nodding in thoughtful agreement. "I'll see what I can do about sending reinforcements to the vault. We can't allow them to know the location of the colony." After interacting with the computer inside of the vault, it deactivated shortly after, so whether or not the Covenant would be able to use it is unknown at this moment, but the technology we can gain by studying the vault would also be vital, stated Axel. "Whether or not they can interact with it is not a risk I would like to take, so I'll have to send some troops immediately, and once we gain control of the vault, we could set up a research facility and send some scientists and engineers down to research the technology inside of the vault," said Admiral Cole. "Also, Admiral, if you can keep this knowledge about Arcadia between the two of us, that would be greatly appreciated," said Axel, as he didn't want people like Admiral Parangaski to start poking her nose in his mission. "I trust your judgment, Axel, so I will keep Arcadia out of the report and just mention the vault," said Admiral Cole, as he trusted Axel's decision to keep it a secret. Admiral Cole himself thought it was a good idea as well, since if Axel finds something amazing on Arcadia, then he would be the one who found it. However, if he was to report it, then Admiral Parangaski probably would try and get to it first to reap the benefits. Cole didn't like Parangaski because of her personality and character. He also thought that she had a superiority complex and abused her power sometimes. "Thank you, Admiral, I'll stay in contact to let you know the results of what I find on Arcadia," stated Axel. With that, the connection between the two admirals was cut. "Avia," he called out, not wasting a moment. "Divert the Leviathan towards Arcadia at maximum speed." "Affirmative, Admiral," came Avia's response quickly from overhead. "Plotting course to Arcadia now." As the ship moved in response to her command, Axel felt a lump of anticipation rise in his throat. He glanced out the window of his office for a moment, watching stars streak past as they jumped to warp speed, each one potentially hiding dangers untold. A war that humanity must win was unfolding before them, and every minute mattered. The Covenant could send another fleet to harvest at any time. Or they could start attacking more human worlds within the outer colonies. He already had plans in place to deal with many situations regarding the political situation of the UNSC. If need be, he could do things the hard way and force a takeover, but doing that early on would result in a split. However, if he waited until things started to intensify, then he could just swoop in, promising victory in the war and take over the UNSC and start to reshape it. Or there was a third option: he could literally just split off from the UNSC and form his own faction, much like the insurrectionists did. Though it would be quite ironic for him to become an insurrectionist after years of fighting against them. These were his options, and he was heavily considering choosing one of them sometime within the next 10 years. Chapter 43. Above Arcadia, Battle Group Tango had exited warp near the planet. Orbiting the planet was the Deep Space Research Array, which is a research station that had finished construction on January 16, 2498. It was built to research large space-based objects such as black holes, heavy gravity events, or objects where vessels could not normally go to. The station only had a hangar for smaller vessels such as Pelicans and a few smaller transport ships. The research station wasn't why he came here, so he didn't pay it no mind and just prepared to head down to the surface. In the hangar of the UNSC Leviathan, 3 Pelicans lifted off and started their descent towards the planet's surface. Their location was on the far side of the planet from Perth City within the jungles. Axel had remembered that there was an ONI facility located near the Forerunner ruins, but orbital scans couldn't detect it, nor was it listed in any official ONI records. Seeing this, he knew that ONI must be keeping the facility a secret. As the Pelicans sliced through the planet's misty atmosphere, Axel scrolled through his tablet reviewing the information about the planet's history. Arcadia was established in the year 2429, where the planet was established as an outer colony. The planet didn't require any terraforming because it was already suitable for human habitation, as the planet had a plentiful supply of resources needed to support human settlement. It quickly became exploited for agricultural and recreational reasons, becoming both a farming world and a tourist destination. The surface was barely explored by the colonists since its establishment, leaving much of the world to be unexplored. The Pelicans flew over the top of the massive jungle with their ramps down, giving the Marines and Axel a nice view of the jungle below. He had decided not to wear his armor since he didn't expect to go into battle anytime soon. The 3 Pelicans flew side by side as they approached their designated target. But as they got closer, the COMM link for the Pelican had gone off. "Unidentified Pelicans, you are in restricted airspace, turn around immediately," ordered the voice on the other line. A second later, 4 Falcon gunships had appeared surrounding the 3 Pelicans with ONI soldiers aiming their guns at the Pelicans. Seeing this, Axel activated his COMM link. "This is Admiral Woods, tell your men to stand down now, we are on a classified mission," stated Axel. The voice on the other end was silent for a moment until another voice came on the line. "This is Lieutenant Commander Bradley, we have orders from ONI to allow no unauthorized personnel near the base. We would have to get permission from ONI to allow you any further." Meanwhile, Axel checked his tablet and a red dot had popped up revealing the location of the ONI base. Axel transmitted the coordinates to the pilots. "Start heading to this location now," ordered Axel as he switched his COMM link between the pilot and Lieutenant Commander Bradley. The 3 Pelicans had changed their heading, causing the 4 Falcons to follow them. "We are landing at the facility anyway, Lieutenant Commander." Meanwhile, on the other end, Lieutenant Commander Bradley had turned his head to look at the hollow projection of Admiral Parangaski. "Admiral, he keeps ignoring our warnings, what should we do?" asked Bradley. "Because he can't just blow them out of the sky, or else he could be severely punished for blowing up an admiral, especially Admiral Woods, who was popular. Allow him to conduct his so-called top-secret mission. I have a feeling that he has discovered something, and I am interested in what he has discovered, so allow him to do whatever it is that he needs to do," said Admiral Parangaski. She had read the recent report about Axel's engagement with the UNSC, and she felt that not everything was in the report. Now that she was informed about this, she wanted to know what exactly he had discovered. "Copy that, Admiral," said Bradley as the hologram vanished. Within the next moments, the Falcons had simply followed Axel and his Pelicans towards the location of the ONI facility. The Pelicans, trailed by the Falcons, continued their journey, weaving over the dense jungle canopy. Axel could make out shapes in the distance that confirmed they were nearing their destination. Massive structures peeked out of the greenery, their metal surfaces reflecting the planet's bright sun. Within the next moments, the Pelicans had landed within the facility's hangar where Lieutenant Commander Bradley was waiting on them. "Lieutenant Commander, there's no need for pleasantries, just lead me to the Forerunner ruins so I can complete my mission," stated Axel. The Marines and MCUs had stepped out of the Pelicans. Bradley nodded, his face losing its initial sternness, and a hint of respect flashing in his eyes. His orders echoed in the sterile hangar. "Alpha Squad, escort Admiral Woods to the ruins." The soldiers moved with disciplined precision and began escorting Axel and his group to the ruins. As they guided him out of the hangar, through the maze-like structure of the facility, the corridor lights cast long shadows, emphasizing the cold, clinical atmosphere of the ONI facility. As they journeyed deeper within the facility, Axel examined their surroundings with an analytical gaze. The halls were pristine and soulless, reflecting the gleaming and calculated vision of ONI's secrecy. Finally, they reached a large steel door guarded by 2 additional soldiers. They stood to attention when they saw Axel and opened the gateway with a nod of acknowledgement. Beyond was a massive cavern that contained Forerunner-like architecture. Alpha Squad had remained at the entrance, while Axel and his group went deeper into the ruins to search for anything that looked to be valuable. A few minutes into the search, one of the MCUs discovered a door which was connected to what appeared to be a main structure. Axel had walked over to check it out, and once he did, the doors had mysteriously opened once, similar to what happened on Harvest. Behind the doors was a path which led down towards an underground complex. Axel followed this path, leaving 4 MCUs and all the Marines to guard the entrance and prevent anybody else from entering behind him. Inside the complex, Axel found himself in an expansive hall that was eerily familiar. The metallic walls shone with an unearthly glow, and the floor was made of the same strange, luminescent material. Faint hieroglyphics, almost invisible to the eye, crawled across every surface. As he traveled deeper into the structure, a sense of quiet anticipation filled the air. Walking at a cautious pace, they ventured deeper into the alien structure. The halls were a maze of intersecting corridors and pathways, while each turn they took revealed breathtaking scenery, vast chambers filled with glowing artifacts and pieces of mysterious technology that hummed with dormant power. Axel paused momentarily to study a massive Forerunner console displaying holographic symbols that jumbled and reformed like an endless anagram. He reached out his gloved hand to touch it. As soon as his hand made contact, the console glowed and displayed a set of coordinates. Axel copied these coordinates down and touched the console again to see if there was something more that he could get, but instead something else happened. A holographic projection of an alien, unlike any he had ever encountered, materialized in front of him. "Reclaimer," the being said urgently, "I don't have long, but I commend your efforts and determination to advance humanity. I believe you will accomplish even greater things in the future, and perhaps we can meet face to face one day. But for now, I implore you to aid the humans in claiming the Ma." The transmission abruptly ended. Axel was left staring at the spot where the hologram once stood, its final words echoing in his mind. He turned his gaze back towards the console but found it lifeless and unresponsive. The entity that had communicated with him was gone. What was she going to say, thought Axel as he was interested in hearing what she was going to say. He knew she was a Forerunner, but he didn't recognize who it was. As he was lost in thought, one of the MCUs had reported something. "Admiral, Lieutenant Commander Bradley and his men are at the entrance demanding entry into the structure." Axel snapped out of his daze. "Let's go, we got what we need from here," he said as they started to run towards the entrance. A few minutes later, when they got there, it was a standoff between Lieutenant Commander Bradley's forces and Axel's Marines and MCUs. "Admiral, what are you hiding from us?" demanded Lieutenant Commander Bradley. But instead of a response, Axel looked at the men with a serious face, as this was the last time that he was going to allow him to speak that way. "Lieutenant Commander, I have been quite calm with you since you were just doing your job, but if you continue to disrespect me, then I will have you punished and thrown out the military," stated Axel. Bradley bristled at Axel's words, staring defiantly into his eyes. The tension in the air was palpable. "I am just doing my job, Admiral." "As you said so yourself," he retorted icily. There was a momentary silence as the two men squared off against each other, their respective forces on the brink of aggression. Then Axel broke the silence, his voice disconcertingly calm. "And as I said, Lieutenant Commander," Axel began, "your job does not involve trying to undermine my authority or intervene in affairs that are beyond your comprehension." The atmosphere between them grew even colder, the standoff more unnerving. Bradley's forces seemed a hair's breadth away from opening fire. "I don't have time for this," said Axel as he began walking forward through the group of soldiers. In front of him his two MCUs maintained a defensive position, clearing a path, while behind him the remaining MCUs and Marines followed behind him while keeping their weapons aimed at their fellow UNSC brothers and sisters. Lieutenant Commander Bradley didn't try and stop them but had instead let them go. Once they had walked past the doors, Lieutenant Commander Bradley turned towards his men. "Go and see what's inside and have the researchers come and explore the inside," ordered Lieutenant Commander Bradley. Meanwhile, Axel had returned to his Pelicans and departed the ONI base. He knew they were under orders from Admiral Parangaski, but Lieutenant Commander Bradley constantly ignored rank and just tried to carry out his orders. If he wanted to, he could have continued to argue with him, but he didn't want the situation to turn into something else, because if he did have a gunfight with the Lieutenant Commander Bradley, then he would have probably been called for treason and hunted down. Luckily, he simply ignored the Lieutenant Commander and knew that he wouldn't open fire first, which is why he just walked past them and left. But ignoring that matter, he now had some coordinates to investigate, and if he was correct then they should lead him to a Forerunner shield world where he would find some powerful new technology, and possibly something else that would help him in the future. Chapter 44. With the departure of Axel, Lieutenant Commander Bradley started researching the underground compound. Researchers specializing in Forerunner technology were being brought in to research everything within the compound. Over the course of the next few days, the researchers discovered that the computers within the compound were active, and they were able to interface with it. Though some computers such as the one that Axel used were inactive and no longer usable. And for the one that could be used, the researcher had never interfaced with a Forerunner compound, so they had to figure out how to work the consoles. Admiral Parangaski was informed about the later altercation between Axel and Lieutenant Commander Bradley, which made her a little disappointed that Lieutenant Commander Bradley would take such rash actions. Yes, she did tell him to make sure that he finds out what Axel was looking for and if he found anything to report it to her. But she did not expect him to carry out her orders in such a manner that he disregarded the 2 stars that Axel had on his uniform. Still, the Forerunner compound that they had discovered was a huge find for the UNSC. So far, she has been watching Axel's career and she has tried to stop his influence multiple times, but he was just too popular. Whether it was within the UNSC or within the colonies, his name was known by billions. The people of Harvest had referred to him as the savior of Harvest or the hero of humanity. And he was also smart, so doing anything directly to him would not be ideal. But he would not always be protected by fame and his intelligence, and when that time comes, she will strike him down directly and force him into submission. For now, she would appear like she supports him on the outside, but on the inside, she would always be scheming to take him down and protect her current position. Leaving aside Admiral Parangaski and her plans which are doomed to fail, Axel had plotted a course to the coordinates that he received from the compound on Arcadia. The place in which they were going was in uncharted space, meaning that humans had not explored that area of the galaxy yet. The trip was to take 2 hours in warp, which meant that the planet was far from any human-charted space. As he was in warp, he had received a message from Admiral Cole stating how he was promoted from Vice Admiral to an actual 4-star Admiral and was placed in charge of defending the outer colonies from the Covenant. He had split the fleet up to operate within various systems across the outer colonies, while the Forerunner vault on Harvest had been successfully taken before the Covenant could do any research. Also, the Covenant had not returned to Harvest yet and had been quiet since they were defeated the first time. As the Leviathan continued its warp travel, Axel immersed himself into the ship's logs and strategic reports, focusing his prodigious mind on possible defense tactics against the Covenant. Each strategy was calculated, examined, discarded, or archived for future use. With the help of the onboard ship AI Avia, Axel was able to run through thousands of simulations and scenarios, finding the best course of action for each one. The ship's bridge had turned into a chaotic war room with holographic screens projecting maps of star systems, naval formations, and Covenant attack patterns. His team worked tirelessly to provide the necessary details and information for his calculations. Axel continued to strategize until finally, the Leviathan arrived at its destination. They were several light years away from charted space, in a system untouched by human exploration. Unknown celestial bodies floated around them as they navigated through uncharted territories. In front of them was the location where the coordinates had led them to. "Admiral, we have arrived at the coordinates, but I don't know where we are exactly," reported Avia. "That's fine, we are somewhere in uncharted space, so naturally you wouldn't know. For now focus on scanning the surface of the planet," ordered Axel. A few moments passed before Avia chimed in with her findings. "I have completed a planetary scan, Admiral, and the readings are quite erratic." Axel sighed. "It was to be expected," said Axel to himself. He did not remember the name of the planet from memory, but he did know that it was a Forerunner shield world. On the outside it was overrun with the flood, which is the crazy readings that Avia is getting. While on the inside was where the Forerunner installation was located. And since much of the planet's surface was overrun by the flood, that would prove to be a problem. And this was not some video game where he could train squads and send them to die against the flood. But the presence of the flood was interfering with orbital scans, preventing him from finding where the Forerunner installation was located. It was a tough decision to make, but he wanted to see how they would do against the flood and see how bad the surface looked. "Avia, deploy troops to the surface. We need to find out what's happening on the surface and set up a base," ordered Axel. "Aye, Admiral," said Avia as she prepared the Marines and MCUs for deployment. The ship was buzzing with activity as the Marines and the MCUs began preparing for deployment. The MCUs, towering machinations of war purpose-built for these types of hazardous offensives, were set to deploy first. They were to establish an initial defensive perimeter on the surface and assess the situation before human troops arrived. One by one Pelicans and transport ships left the hangar of the Leviathan escorted by longswords. Once they breached the atmosphere, the camera feeds displayed from the Pelicans revealed the surface of the planet, which looked highly volatile. As they were flying looking for a clearing to land, some strange creatures had appeared flying at them. Pelican 2, are you seeing this? Asked the pilot for Pelican 1. Yeah, I'm seeing it. What should we do? Responded the pilot for Pelican 2. Before Pelican 1 could respond, Axel had chimed in. You are free to engage. Viper team, light them up and protect the Pelicans, ordered Axel. Viper team acknowledged and had shot their 120mm ventral guns at the flying creatures. At the same time, the flying creatures had shot their own projectile at the Pelicans before they were shot down, which penetrated the hull. This is Pelican 3, my windshield has been cracked by a projectile from the creatures, reported the pilot for Pelican 3. Understood, Pelican 3, maintain formation and be cautious, Axel responded. Shortly after that, the Pelican approached their location and started to unload the MCUs, while the transport ships had come in and dropped off some warthogs. A small team of MCUs had broken off from the main group to start scouting the area. Axel had multiple screens up watching the situation on the ground. Admiral, came Avia's voice, her tone slightly strained. The surface is more hostile than we anticipated. Detecting multiple concentrations of those strange creatures around our landing position. Continue with the mission, Avia, Axel ordered without hesitation. And once the defenses are set up, deploy the Marines so we can figure out a way around this interference. The second wave of Marines prepped for deployment. The ship's hold was soon filled with the clatter of armored boots and the whirring sound of weaponry checks. Meanwhile, Viper team continued their engagement with the flying flood forms. Projectiles blasted through space around them, and they returned fire with their 120mm ventral guns. So far things have been going well for them. Or so he thought until the next report came in. Admiral, I am picking up large creature structures all over the area. It's similar to hive structures and large amounts of creatures are converging on the base, reported Avia. Deploy all aerial vehicles and get us within the planet's atmosphere. The 2 destroyers and cruiser will maintain position in orbit and provide fire support, while the 2 frigates will accompany us to the surface, ordered Axel. Acknowledged, Admiral, Avia responded, her voice as cool as ever despite the increasingly dire situation. The Leviathan rumbled as it directed its trajectory towards the planet's atmosphere. Axel watched as the feeds from the Pelicans displayed an escalating conflict. The creatures were converging on their position in waves. The MCUs were holding their ground, but for how long, that was unpredictable. The Falcons and more longswords were deployed to the surface for close air support, but they would take some time to reach the MCU's position. The Marines were the same, as they were en route, but would be a few minutes. Still, the MCUs had managed to hold their own with the limited defenses that they were able to set up. Viper team, status report, Axel ordered. He continued to monitor the battlefield on his holographic screens, his mind already calculating strategies and countermeasures. We're engaging the enemy, sir. They are relentless, but we're holding our position, came Viper 1's response amidst the background noise of gunfire and orders being barked. Keep at it, Viper team. Your objective is to buy some time for our Marines to land on the ground, said Axel. And Avia initiate surface pattern Alpha 9. Affirmative, Admiral. Avia proceeded to issue out orders, her voice echoing throughout the ship. The frigate pilots gunned their engines, escorting the Leviathan as they pierced through layers of clouds and mist into the planet's atmosphere. The descent was turbulent, the alien planet's atmosphere buffeting their ship and its escorts. Axel braced himself, eyes never leaving the screens displaying the progressing battle below. The rain of fire from the cruiser and destroyers in orbit was lending some much-needed support to the embattled ground forces, but he knew that it was not enough. Admiral, Avia reported, her voice cutting through the chaos, Marines have landed and are deploying. They have split up with some MCUs and are now pushing east from our landing zone towards what appears to be clusters of these hive structures. Good, Axel replied. He squinted at the feeds, analyzing the movements of both his troops and those of the enemy. We need to find a way to disrupt these creatures, break their momentum. We could try to target the most concentrated areas with an orbital Mach round, Admiral, but we would need the Marines to designate the target, Avia suggested. Do it, responded Axel. Avia, send a notification to our ground units. Designate the most concentrated areas for an orbital Mach round. Affirmative, Admiral. Avia's fingers danced across her controls, relaying the orders. Viper team, I need you to cover our Marines, Axel commanded. His eyes flickered over another screen that showed Viper team's longswords weaving between hives and enemy fire. We're on it, Admiral, came Viper 1's response. The next few seconds were a blur. The longswords dipped and darted in an aerial dance of death, drawing enemy fire away from their ground troops. At the same time, Marines and MCUs pressed on through the teeming swarm of alien creatures, their objective clear: mark the enemy's hive clusters for orbital bombardment. Admiral, came a voice over the comms. It was Sergeant Major Hawkins, leader of the Marine detachment. We've designated several of the hive structures for MAC strikes. Understood, Sergeant Major, Axel replied, his gaze intently focused on a representation of the planet shimmering in front of him. Avia, prepare to fire MAC rounds on my mark. Dots began to flash upon the holographic map, targets designated for destruction. Fire, ordered Axel. MAC rounds firing in 3, 2, 1. Avia's voice counted down, as the cruiser and destroyers in orbit had fired their MAC rounds at the designated target. The holographic screens showed the MAC rounds piercing through the planet's atmosphere like fiery meteors, their trajectory unerringly aimed at the marked hive structures. The moments ticked by with a tense silence until impact confirmed, Admiral, Avia reported, her tone carrying a note of triumph. Multiple hits on target. I am not picking up a strange signal, Admiral, on the far side of the planet announced Avia. Copy that, recall all ground troops, and plot a course for that location, said Axel. The flood structures were interfering with their scanners. But destroying them had weakened that interference, allowing them to pick up the signal from the Forerunner installation. Now it was time to go and claim the rewards. Chapter 45. Admiral, we have arrived at the location of the signal, and I am picking up some strange signals, reported Avia. Axel, who was sitting down in his command chair, had turned around to face Avia, whose hologram was standing on top of the central console in the bridge. What are picking up? Asked Axel. Though he said that he knew exactly what was about to happen. Now that they had arrived, he recognized this area of the planet, and if he was correct, then in a few seconds the ocean below them would part, revealing underground Forerunner architecture within the planet. I keep picking up something that reads docking and cleansing. But that can't be right, said Avia. Admiral, we may have a situation on our hands. After she said that, just as Axel predicted, the ocean parted, revealing a large underground area that began to pull the UNSC Leviathan inside, while the two frigates were unaffected by this. Admiral, we are getting pulled in, and we have company coming from the underground Forerunner structure, reported Avia as Axel shifted his attention to the hole in the ocean and saw more than a dozen Forerunner sentinels approaching the Leviathan. Avia, have the frigates maintain position. It seems whatever is down there is what we came for, ordered Axel. Copy that, Admiral. Also, I'm picking up a new signal within the planet, and wherever this is taking us will lead us right to it, explained Avia. With that, the two frigates had maintained their position above the surface, while the Leviathan was dragged down below, followed by the Forerunner sentinels, who began scanning the entire ship. They didn't pose any danger, so Axel had the ship's weapons hold fire as they navigated through the Forerunner architecture. Stay alert, Axel warned his crew. We don't know what's waiting for us down there. All stations, maximum readiness. The bridge was filled with tension as they descended further into the depths, guided by the unseen force that had drawn them in. The walls of the Forerunner architecture were pulsing with a strange energy as they passed by, their gleam reflecting upon the Leviathan's hull. Axel watched through the bridge viewport as they flew deeper into the structure. This was his first time seeing a shield world, and he was very interested in what technology and such the Forerunners used to make it. Because if he could acquire that technology, then he could make massive underground bases to defend against the flood, the same way the Forerunners did it. Incoming transmission, Avia reported, her holographic form flickering as she processed the signal. It's heavily encrypted, but it's Forerunner. Axel's heart pounded in his chest. This was uncharted territory, and every new revelation made him feel excited for what lay ahead. He gave a nod, silently urging Avia to decrypt it. Moments later, through the ship-wide intercom came a voice, an ethereal, resonating hum that reverberated throughout every deck. Welcome, Reclaimer, it began in almost perfect human tongue. You are expected. It was the sound of an AI, which Axel figured to probably be a monitor. Admiral, piped up one of his navigation officers. There's an enormous chamber opening up ahead. True enough, ahead of them was an immense cavity within the planet's core, illuminated by luminescent strips running along its walls and ceiling. As they drew closer to the opening, Axel had seen sunlight, which meant that they were close to entering the center of the planet where the central controls for the Forerunner shield world was located. Moments later, the Leviathan shot out of the chamber and entered what seemed to be another world. There were lush green trees and plants everywhere. Admiral called out Avia. Energy readings are spiking, it's off our charts. Of course, this was to be expected as they were literally in the core of the planet. The Sentinels had stopped following them and Axel didn't hear from the Forerunner AI since the first time. "Admiral, I just received some coordinates from that Forerunner AI," said Avia as she sent the coordinates to Axel's command screen. "I got them," Avia said Axel as he looked at the location the coordinates were taking them. It appeared to be another Forerunner structure on the ground. "Avia, prepare the Pelicans, I am going to those coordinates," ordered Axel. Admiral, Pelicans are spinning up now," responded Avia. As the Leviathan hovered above the lush green landscape, Axel could see the scattering of Forerunner structures that littered the ground. Some were tall, with slender pillars, while others took more abstract forms, their purpose unclear. Nonetheless, they were all pulsed with a life of their own, testament to the unseen energy that pervaded this place. "Admiral," came Avia's voice. "The Pelicans are ready and prepped for departure." "Understood," replied Axel as he rose from his command chair. He cast one last look at the viewport. This was a new world to explore, and he intended to unravel its mysteries. Once he is done, he will have a secret lab set up inside to study the place. Of course he would have to find some trustworthy people so that they wouldn't leak this information to anybody else. Walking off the bridge, Axel made his way towards the hangar bay where 2 Pelican dropships were awaiting him. The pilot saluted as he approached. "Admiral on deck," echoed through the metal corridors. At ease, he dismissed, entering one of the dropships. As he strapped himself alongside the MCUs. This time he had decided to bring only the MCUs. Soon after, the hangar doors opened, and the 2 Pelicans surged forward into the verdant landscape of this hidden world. They passed over vast forests and meandering rivers until they arrived at the coordinates given by Avia. The Pelicans descended into a clearing near a Forerunner structure. Axel stepped out onto grassy terrain, feeling an odd sense of peace blanketing everything around him. As soon as he stepped out of the Pelican, he walked towards the Forerunner structure, which looked similar to the one he had seen in the Halo Wars video game. At the same time, a strange small spherical-shaped object had approached him, causing the MCUs to aim their weapons, prepared to shoot if necessary. "Stand down," Axel commanded, his gaze not leaving the spherical form before him. It hovered a few feet above the ground, a shell of gleaming metal pulsating with the same energy they had seen throughout the structure. He recognized it from memory as a Forerunner monitor, an ancient caretaker of places such as these. "I welcome you, Reclaimer." The monitor's voice was deep and melodious, speaking in a dialect of English that was strangely archaic. "I am 295. Hearken, watch. You have come to seek knowledge. And knowledge you shall find." "It seems I've been expected," said Axel. "Yes, you have. Ever since your first interaction with Forerunner technology you have been deemed a highly capable and intelligent human," the monitor replied, floating in a slow circle around him. "Your presence here is no mistake. It was foreseen and prepared for." The monitor moved ahead, illuminating the path towards the Forerunner structure with soft, ambient light. "Come," it prompted. "The knowledge you seek waits within." With a swift command, Axel had his MCUs fall into formation behind him as they followed the monitor. As they approached the structure, the monitor stopped moving as they stood in the middle of a strange structure. "This is a teleporter which will take you to the main structure where you will be given some knowledge," said the monitor as the teleporter activated and instantly transported Axel to another place. In front of him was a path leading to a structure, so Axel followed it and had found something similar to what he found on Harvest. It was a spherical-shaped control panel that had started to spin when he reached out his hand. It had aligned itself with his hand, and when he touched it the whole thing lit up as a beam of light shot up and the surrounding structures started to move. Next to him appeared the monitor once again. "These are the Sojourner-class dreadnoughts, which are extremely powerful and are equipped with very powerful cannons that will tear apart any ship," explained the monitor. "The knowledge of how to operate these ships and its armaments are in your hands now." Axel withdrew his hand from the console and looked at all the Sojourner-class dreadnoughts which were present. The monitor moved in a slow orbit around Axel, the soft glow from its central eye reflecting off Axel's uniform. "There is so much more to learn, Reclaimer. However, the intricacies of Forerunner technology require time for complete comprehension." Axel nodded, trying to process everything he'd learned. The power now available to him was staggering. It would change the course of battles and even wars. "I can't keep this secret forever," he mused out loud. "Indeed," responded the monitor. "But with great power comes great responsibility. It will be up to you when and how you choose to share this knowledge." Axel wondered if the monitor had access to his memories or something. Once he heard that statement, but then again maybe it was just a coincidence. "Is there any other knowledge?" asked Axel as he was looking for more. No, Reclaimer, you will have to find that other knowledge located on other installations. That is the path that you must take to prove yourself and prepare the humans to stand on a higher level than they are now, said the monitor. Axel understood and acknowledged the statement with a nod. He was aware that it wouldn't be as simple as that, but at least he now had a clear plan of action. He had now acquired a powerful weapon, but when to use it or even reveal it to the UNSC would have to wait until he had taken power. For now, though, he planned to set up a research base to research and study the Forerunner technology. Chapter 46. Before leaving, Axel had gotten permission from the monitor to set up a small research base within the installation. In exchange, the monitor gets to watch their progress and interact with them. The monitor would only help them a little when it came to their research, but would mostly be interested in observing how they approached and solved problems. The monitor wanted to see how they compared to Axel. Back to the Leviathan, they had already exited the installation by going the same way they came before. And after a few moments they had arrived at the entrance where the ocean once again parted and the Leviathan was able to return back to the surface of the planet. Once there, the two frigates were there holding their position just as ordered, while the cruiser and two destroyers were still in orbit above the planet. Axel had contacted them, letting him know that their mission was a success and that they had discovered Forerunner architecture below the surface of the planet. He didn't go into greater details as he didn't know who could be trusted with this information. While most of his crew was loyal to him, he still needed to be careful to prevent the spread of crucial information regarding the fact that they had found a Forerunner shield world. Not that the Security Council knew what it was, but their curiosity is what would cause problems for Axel the most. After establishing contact with the rest of the battle group, Axel had regrouped in orbit above the planet and had departed back to Algolese, where Axel would try and gather loyal or trustworthy scientists, engineers, and Forerunner specialists to set up a secret research base within the planet. He would also start a new project to create a flash clone of himself and make it into an AI so that he can really start to move his plans forward. There was only so much that he could do by himself, not that he didn't have any help, but if he had an AI that could assist him, then he could expand his influence even more. Once the AI was completed, he would first have it start spread propaganda about his achievements and creations, which will gather him more support from all over the UEG and UNSC. At the same time, he would be gathering evidence against Admiral Parangaski and Admiral Gardner. The remaining members of the Security Council could be considered allies or was not a threat to his plans. As the Leviathan and the rest of Battle Group Tango approached Algolese, Axel found himself lost in contemplation. He had already begun to assemble a list of potential recruits for his research base. The most brilliant minds, those who could be trusted and who shared his vision for humanity's place among the stars. The flash clone was a tricky business though. The legality of it was ambiguous at best, and if its existence was discovered, it could lead to severe consequences. But Axel had always been willing to take risks, especially if the rewards were high enough. The AI, based on his own mind, would be invaluable. His plan went beyond just a shield world and advanced technology. It stretched into politics, public opinion, the overall direction of humanity. An AI would help him manipulate these aspects with precision and subtlety that human hands couldn't achieve. But before all of that, he needed to first deal with a new situation that had arisen. Katherine was due to have his child in a days. It was expected to be a daughter, and Katherine had already decided on the name. As these thoughts occupied his mind, he looked out the window in his captain's quarters to the distant specks of Algolese. Katherine's impending childbirth added a new element into his plans. He cared deeply about her, and the idea of having a child was both exciting and daunting. The responsibility of fatherhood was not something that he could simply ignore or delegate to others. Indeed, Axel had always been an individual who believed in facing challenges head-on. He had started as a young lieutenant in the UNSC fleet, working his way up to a 2-star admiral with determination, a keen strategic mind, and his intelligence. This personal endeavor, however, was an entirely different adventure. It was one that involved diapers, sleepless nights, and a whole new level of love and commitment. As he drew closer to Algolese, he mentally strategized his next moves like a grand game of chess. First, he would be present for the birth of his daughter and make time to watch her grow up. Next, he would set his research team abuzz with activities in the newly discovered Forerunner shield world and simultaneously kickstart the risky flash clone operation. Once that was done, then the AI propaganda would spin stories about his heroism and scientific breakthroughs to earn him more followers across UEG and UNSC. Then came gathering evidence against Admirals Parangaski and Gardner while ensuring they stayed oblivious of their impending downfall. All this while securing alliances within the Security Council and among other high-ranking members of the UNSC. He rubbed his temple as if trying to physically chase away the enormity of his tasks ahead. A soft chime sounded, indicating they were docking with the station orbiting above Algolese. Axel proceeded to the hangar and took a Pelican down to the planet's surface where the main facility for ONI Section 3 was located. Once the Pelican landed, he stepped off onto the solid ground, and immediately set a brisk pace towards the medical section of the facility where Katherine was currently located. As he walked towards the medical section of the facility, he was greeted by soldiers and staff alike. The soldiers paid their respects with a salute, while the staff simply greeted him verbally or shook his hand since he was their boss. After a few minutes he had arrived at Katherine's room where he saw her resting on the bed. There was a radiance to her that he hadn't seen before, a certain glow that lit up her face despite the physical exhaustion. He approached her gently, pulling up a chair next to the bed. "How are you feeling?" he asked softly, taking her hand within his own. Katherine gave him a tired but contented smile and placed her other hand on her swollen belly. "I'm just fine," she murmured. "But our little girl is getting impatient." Axel chuckled, feeling an inexplicable warmth spreading through him at the statement. His daughter, their daughter, was eager to see the world. "Seems she's picked up your impatience then," he quipped, earning a soft laugh from Katherine. For the next few hours Axel had stayed by her side, occasionally feeling her belly for the small kicks that his daughter would give. Eventually 2 days had passed and it was time for daughter to enter the world. A team of doctors and nurses swiftly made their way into the room. The atmosphere turned tense, but Katherine remained calm, her hand firmly wrapped around Axel's. He gave her an encouraging smile, squeezing her hand in response. Hours passed like minutes. Axel stood by Katherine's side, providing a comforting presence through the laborious process as the tension in the room built up. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of anxious waiting, a soft cry echoed through the room. The intensity in the air dissolved almost instantly into excited whispers and a flurry of activity as the nurse cleaned up the newborn and handed her over to Axel. Axel felt an unusual sensation as he held the tiny life in his hands. Pride swelled within him as he gazed at the small face that looked back at him with curiosity. Katherine was exhausted, but she looked at Axel and their daughter with joy clearly reflected in her eyes. Despite the ordeals of the delivery process, she was radiant, the glow had not diminished but rather intensified. "Miranda," she whispered softly, "her name is Miranda." Axel repeated the name silently to himself as he watched Miranda's little fingers wrap around his own. Overwhelmed with emotion, he gently placed Miranda into Katherine's waiting arms before pressing a soft kiss onto both his ladies' foreheads. After the successful birth of his daughter, he was now a proud father. However, he now faced the challenge of balancing his career plans with the responsibilities of raising Miranda and being present in her formative and early years. Chapter 47. After Miranda's birth, Katherine had spent another week recovering within the medical section of the facility. Well, at least what she would consider recovering, since once Axel told her about the secret research base on a Forerunner shield world, she had become obsessed with going to see it. But Axel forced her to rest for a week before she returned to her normal duties. She reluctantly had to accept as Axel was more ordering her than asking. In exchange he gave her a tablet with some recent data collected from the shield world that she could look over and study for the week. Meanwhile, Axel spared no time and dived headfirst into his plans. He had started to gather the people and resources needed to set up a research base on the shield world while also starting the flash clone operation. The first few attempts were a disaster, leading to degenerated clones that died within hours of their creation. But every failure gave Axel new insights into the problems caused by flash cloning. It took almost a dozen tries over the course of a week before he had finally created. He also didn't neglect his new duties as he spent as much time with Miranda as he could. During this week, Katherine was kept entirely focused on her tablet full of shield world data. Axel had noticed a strange excitement in her whenever she talked about the technology they might discover or new research paths they could explore. When the week finally came to end, Katherine could not wait to see the Forerunner shield world and speak with the Forerunner AI who oversaw such a massive structure. The only thing holding her back was the fact that her daughter had just been born and she didn't want to leave so soon after she had just given birth. Katherine mulled over this conflict between her personal and professional life, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. On one hand, the allure of uncharted discoveries in the Forerunner shield world was an opportunity of a lifetime, one a scientist like her would be loath to pass up. Conversely, the birth of Miranda had triggered an instinctual maternal bond that was proving difficult to ignore. Axel, noticing Katherine's inner turmoil, suggested a compromise. "Why don't you go ahead and go, and I'll take care of her, but make sure to come back throughout the week to spend some time with her so that she can always remember her mother's face." "If that's what you suggest, then I suppose I can work with that," responded Katherine. "Good, I'll give you one of my frigates, which you will use alongside the other researchers and scientists to travel to the Shield world. Once there, be sure to not go overboard and compromise our relationship with the Monitor," stated Axel. The Monitor only accepted his proposal because of its own interest in humans, and if one of them were to cause problems, then they would probably be kicked out, leaving Axel to be the only one allowed in. Why would he be the only one allowed in? It was simple. By now the Monitor had recognized him as a highly intelligent reclaimer and probably the biggest factor in humanity's rise to power within the universe. Adding some outside influence, Axel was sure that the Monitor would not kick him out, but it's still a possibility. But he wasn't worried about that, as the people he had chosen were people with well-rounded personalities who could adapt to their environment and were not known to cause problems when working with others. In addition, a detachment of MCUs would watch over the researchers to ensure that they did not cause problems. Upon hearing this, Katherine felt a sense of relief and a small smile curved her lips. She was anxious but also thrilled to embark on this new adventure. The idea of treading on the forgotten paths of advanced alien civilization was too appealing to resist. Axel's reassurance and his meticulous planning set her mind at ease. "Thank you, Axel," she said, her eyes misty with gratitude. "I'll do all I can to understand the Forerunner's technology." Over the next few days, Katherine and a team of scientists were briefed in detail about their mission. Axel oversaw all the preparations and carefully selected each member of the team, not only for their scientific prowess but also for their interpersonal skills and adaptability. 2 days later, the frigate named UNSC Da Vinci was ready to depart toward the Forerunner Shield world. Katherine glanced back one last time at Axel holding Miranda before boarding the ship. It would only be a few days before she would see them again, but she would still miss their presence, so she made mental note to not get too caught up in her research. Axel watched as the ship disappeared into the vast expanse of space. Miranda was sleeping peacefully in his arms. Over the past 2 weeks she had always been calm around him, and only ever cried when she was hungry, needed a diaper to change, and whenever she couldn't see him. After a few moments he returned to his lab with Miranda in his arms. The entire room had been cleaned up and basically detoxed so that air was fresh for Miranda, and she wouldn't be inhaling any dangerous chemicals or particles. He also had a little carrier set up for her which would move her around the room with him so that he would always be in her sights. It was also convenient for when she fell asleep, as he could keep an eye on her. Once they got settled in his lab, Axel had started to submit the paperwork for Taylor to become an officer. It was going to be a tremendous step for him, but Axel believed that he could do, especially since he had been serving under him for about 2 decades. He had a lot of experience learning from Axel and was also taught many things. Taylor's drive to learn more and take on more responsibilities will make him a great officer. That plus his time spent with Axel would. He would be gone for 4 years where he would spend it in officer training. Axel had managed to secure him the rank of lieutenant once he graduated because of his time in service, and because Taylor was trustworthy and would be a major ally and close friend to have in the future. After he finished that paperwork, he focused on finishing up the last part of the Flash clone project. He had already made a successfully loyal Flash clone. Now all he needed to do was to come up with a name and transfer the Flash clone's consciousness to that of an AI. Meanwhile on Cersenius 4, Petty Officer First Class John 117 was fighting the Covenant together with his mentor Staff Sergeant Avery Johnson and Colonel Marmon Crowther, who he was currently at odds with. Colonel Crowther often dismissed John or ignored him due to his age. Still, John fought for what he believed in and what Axel had taught him growing up. They were evacuating the Corbulo Academy of Military Science after 3 Covenant cruisers had entered the system and begun landing troops on the surface. John led his team of Spartans against the Covenant alongside Staff Sergeant Johnson and Colonel Crowther. And slowly as the battle progressed, Colonel Crowther's dislike for John started to disappear because of his exploits and his amazing leadership skills amongst the Spartans. It was the beginning of a close relationship formed in the middle of war, which was not a rare occurrence. Though for John this close relationship would soon serve to his advantage in the future. Chapter 48. Move that guy out of the way. Staff Sergeant Johnson bellowed as 2 Marines dragged an injured comrade to safety behind the lines. Petty Officer, I've got a platoon pinned down on the east side of the campus and they're in trouble, Sergeant Johnson shouted to John. Aye, sir, Blue Team move out, John replied promptly, rallying his team as they sprinted towards the embattled east side of the campus. The Spartans led by John navigated through the war-torn landscape of the Corbulo Academy of Military Science, once a place of learning now reduced to debris-filled streets and wreckage. Tango Squad, Hold on tight. We're en route, John relayed over his comms, the crackling response indicating the urgency of their comrades' situation. The sound of plasma rifles echoed around them as they moved briskly through the rubble. Suddenly, Kelly broke formation, diving to the side as a charged plasma grenade landed where she had been a fraction of a second earlier. The explosion barely missed her, and she rolled back into formation, unscathed but for a few charred armor plates. Nice moves, Kelly. Can't have you getting toasted just yet, John quipped, his voice laced with determination as they pressed onward. The team's progress was interrupted by a group of enemy combatants emerging from a darkened alleyway. Plasma shots flew past them as they sought cover behind a charred vehicle. Samuel, cover me! John shouted, signaling for suppressing fire as he flanked the enemy position. The other Spartan team members had returned fire as well and started to advance towards the enemy while taking cover whenever they can. Reloading! Kelly called out, her hands moving swiftly to replenish her weapon's ammunition. As the battle raged on, their movements were coordinated yet fluid, each member of the team anticipating the other's actions without hesitation. They fought with a fierce resolve born from years of training and camaraderie. John's flanking maneuver had worked, and he had killed 4 grunts who were taking cover behind a destroyed warthog. The other Spartan advanced at the same time, closing the gap between them and the Covenant forces. With John shooting them from the rear and the other Spartans attacking from the front, the Covenant forces stood no chance and were defeated in less than 3 minutes. Stay sharp, Spartans! We're not done yet, he stated as they moved forward. The sound of an intense battle could be heard ahead, which meant that they were getting close to Tango Squad's position. As the team advanced, a series of strong, rapid-fire explosions suddenly ripped through the air, turning a row of structures into a mess of rubble and dust in seconds. Without missing a beat, John signaled the squad to move towards the source of the disturbance. His visor flickered with static as he attempted to raise Tang Squad on comms. Tango Squad, report! He called out. Amidst garbled noise and bouts of static, a faint reply echoed back. East side, heavy fire, need backup. Spartans, move! John commanded as they picked up their pace, darting through the smoky haze that had filled the once crisp air. As they rounded a corner, the scene that unfolded before them was one of utter chaos. Marines pinned down by a barrage of plasma fire from an onslaught of Covenant forces who were backed by 2 towering Covenant figures which the UNSC had begun to call hunters. Take out those hunters, John ordered without hesitation. Kelly and Samuel split off from the group without a word, moving swiftly like shadows towards their targets. John and Artie, also known as Arthur 079, engaged the hordes of elites and grunts in fearsome melee combat while also providing covering fire for Kelly and Samuel. Their superior training and Spartan 2 augmentations gave them an edge over the Covenant. Suddenly, one hunter locked its gaze onto Kelly. Its fuel rod gun charged up, a bright green glow illuminated its figure against the smoke-filled battlefield. Just as it fired at her point blank, Samuel came barreling into it with his own customized rocket launcher that was mounted on his shoulder. The hunter was knocked back into the other one just as its weapon discharged. In an instant, the area was consumed by a brilliant, searing flash as the rocket launcher's payload erupted. A shockwave rippled outward, flinging debris in all directions and momentarily obscuring the battlefield in a rolling cloud of smoke and dust. Every Spartan weapon was custom-made, even the heavy weapons such as rocket launchers, grenade launchers, and heavy machines guns. This was to separate the Spartan weapons from your standardized weapon that the UNSC Marines and Army soldiers use. The Covenant forces were momentarily stunned as the 2 hunters were completely wiped out, causing their advance to falter. Nice one, Samuel! John shouted over the comms, his voice drowned out by incoming plasma shots. Kelly, who had been momentarily thrown off balance by the blast wave, regained her footing and began to lay down fire on Covenant forces. As John and Artie fought their way through the Covenant line, dispatching enemy soldiers with ruthless efficiency, they saw a group of beleaguered Marines huddled behind what remained of a damaged warthog. Cover me, John ordered his companion before he sprinted towards the Marines, ducking and weaving through gunfire. Reaching them, he quickly assessed the situation. Their ammunition was running low, and several men were wounded. All right Marines, we are getting you out of here, he announced to the beleaguered soldiers. Kelly, Samuel, we need suppressing fire on these positions. Artie, see if you can't get that warthog up and running. A chorus of affirmatives met his orders as he turned his attention back to the Marines. There was half a dozen of them left from what looked to have been a larger platoon. Their faces were ashen and strained, but they looked relieved at their arrival. Hold this position, commanded the Marine sergeant in charge. "We're about to turn the tide." Turning back towards the battle, John took a moment to analyze the situation. The Covenant forces were regrouping, clearly surprised by the sudden attack and loss of their heavy hitters, the Hunters. It was a brief lull in the fighting that they needed to take advantage of. "Blue team use heavy weapons to push the enemy back," ordered John while Artie continued to work on the Warthog's dead engine. The team had acknowledged and started to use their heavy weaponry, which include heavy machine guns, grenade launchers and rocket launchers to engage the Covenant. Meanwhile, Artie was busy trying to get the Warthog back online. The engine had taken a plasma shot, and he had to reroute power just to get it running. And if they could get it moving, it would make a big difference in their evacuation efforts. Out on the battlefield, the Covenant had regrouped. A group of elites had taken command of the Grunts, who were now lining up into a more organized formation. The Spartan team watched as two more Hunters lumbered into view from behind a crumbled wall. They'd have to be dealt with soon. Samuel was the first to open fire, his rocket launcher spewing forth a deadly payload that spiraled towards the enemy lines with lethal intent. Their alien cries of surprise and fear were drowned out by the thunderous explosion that erupted amidst their ranks. Kelly fired next, her grenades lobbing over the battlefield and exploding amidst groups of grunts who shrieked and scuttled for cover too late. A few other Spartans formed a line and started laying down suppressing fire on the Covenant's position. The two Hunters had started to advance too close, so Samuel changed his target to them and shot his last two rocket launcher shots at them, which obliterated them just like the first time. Meanwhile, Artie was having moderate success with repairing the Warthog. With a final twist of a wrench, he managed to bring the engine back to life. The vehicle rumbled to life, sending a cloud of smoke and dust into the air. Despite its many dents and scorch marks, it was serviceable. "Got it running," Artie announced over comms. "John, I am ready for evac." "Copy that," John said. "Marines, mount up." He gestured towards the newly operational Warthog. The Warthog was a transport Warthog that didn't have the machine gun mounted on the back, so it can hold 8 people including the driver and passenger. The wounded Marines started to get on the vehicle with Artie carefully helping them on board. After everyone was aboard, he hopped onto the driver's seat and revved up the engine. "Cover them," John ordered his team as Artie began to drive away from the battlefield. As the Warthog pulled away, a barrage of plasma fire erupted from remaining Covenant forces giving chase, but it was effectively suppressed by Spartans' counter-fire. Once the Warthog was far enough away, John didn't waste any time and ordered Blue Team to pull back and retreat, as they were running low on ammo and would be forced to fight in melee if they kept fighting. Blue Team had pulled back while taking a few more grunts and elites out as they retreated. They didn't want the Covenant to follow them back, so they used the nearby forest to lose the Covenant forces before they returned to Staff Sergeant Johnson. Meanwhile, a few minutes later at the evac point, the injured Marines and Artie had arrived. The battle that was happening before was over and the evac point was quiet, at least for now. The Marines had been transported to the medical tent to receive care for their injuries, while those that could still fight were ordered to restock on ammo and help with evacuating the civilians and students that were still within the academy. Chapter 50, Chapter 49. The evacuation of the Corbulo Academy of Military Science had proceeded, with the Covenant being held back. ODSTs were dropped from orbit to halt the enemy advance. Blue Team led by John had assisted with both evacuation efforts and holding off the Covenant. Half of the Academy was destroyed by the Covenant's attack, as for the remaining half it was only a matter of time until the Covenant destroyed that as well. At the same time, in orbit 4 UNSC ships which were the closest to the Academy had responded to assist in the evacuation efforts. 2 of them were frigates while the other 2 were Halcyon-class light cruisers. They had descended into the planet's atmosphere to deal with the Covenant cruisers. But Covenant cruisers were no joke, and it was 3 of them at that. Their sheer size was even bigger than the Halcyon-class light cruisers and the frigates. Still, they engaged the Covenant cruisers to give a chance for the Marines and the Spartans to finish evacuating the Academy and civilians. Still, many students and civilians were already killed by the Covenant during their initial attack. The Covenant had attacked so suddenly that there were more people dead than evacuated. Once all possible evacuations had been completed, the UNSC abandoned the planet. Despite their energy shielding, the battle against the cruisers did not go as planned. The frigates were both destroyed and one of the Halcyon-class light cruisers sustained significant damage, leaving only 1 cruiser unscathed. After the battle, only one of the UNSC's ships remained fully operational, 2 were lost and another sustained significant damage. While they evacuated some people, a lot of people still died from the initial attack, plus the people who died on the 2 frigates. While energy shielding had greatly improved the UNSC ability to fight the Covenant, it was not the only factor to consider. The Covenant had stronger weapons, bigger ships, and the element of surprise. The UNSC ships on the other hand had only recently implemented energy shielding, which the Covenant had had years to develop and improve. It appeared that, at least for the time being, the UNSC would need to have a numerical advantage in both ships and ship size if they wanted to defeat the enemy. Alternatively, they could develop advanced weapons to match the Covenant's technology, something which was already present and was slowly being implemented. Meanwhile, 2 months later, on Algolese, Axel had completed the final steps of the Flash Clone project. The Flash Clone was alive, and it was already aware of its purpose. It was created to be loyal to Axel alongside to prevent future conflicts and have a reliable super AI that he can rely on. The clone walked upright and strong, its eyes gleaming with a fierce intelligence. Yet, there was something uncanny about it, an eerie echo of the man he was based on. His face looked too perfect, too smooth, as if someone had sanded away the genuine roughness that accompanied organic growth. He was a near replica of Axel but didn't possess his natural quirks or unique traits and behaviors. It was a revolutionary thing that he had created. Maybe in the future he will develop cloning technology after he becomes the leader for humanity. For now, though, the Flash clone had laid on the table where he would undergo the procedure to transform his mind into that of an AI. With him was Dr. Sebastian Phillips, a doctor who specialized in biotechnology and some other things. He was one of the doctors who worked under Section 3 with Spartans to oversee their development like what he and Katherine did. Dr. Phillips, who was dressed in a clean lab coat, moved around the room with the methodical precision of a man who knew his craft inside out. He operated his array of imposing machines with expertise, checking readings and making fine adjustments. The silence was broken by a sudden knock on the door. Axel looked up from where he was sitting in front of a screen, making sure that the transfer of the Flash clone's neural pattern to that of an AI matrix strata would go smoothly. "Come in," he said, not looking up from his work. The door slid open to reveal a petite woman, her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, her blue eyes wide with anticipation. It was Dr. Elena Montini, another top scientist on Axel's team. Miranda, who was lying in her comfortable bed, had turned towards the noise of Dr. Elena, who had smiled at Miranda. She had gotten used to seeing Dr. Elena, who had often visited Axel's lab. "I've brought the AI matrix you requested, Admiral," she said, holding out a small box that held the most advanced artificial intelligence ever designed by humans. She had assisted in helping with its creation utilizing her degree in neurology and biotechnology. Though something of this magnitude couldn't have been completed without Axel's help. When Axel explained something to her, she could understand the knowledge even if it was a new concept. For example, when she was first told about transferring a Flash clone's brain to an AI intelligence, she did not believe that something like that could be done without have advanced technology. But then again, she had heard about how Axel had always made the impossible possible. "Good," Axel replied curtly as he took it from her. He turned his gaze back to the clone lying on the table. "This is where the real operation begins." He hooked up several cables to ports on the clone's head. The doctor ran test patterns through each cable before giving Axel a nod of approval. Axel then carefully positioned the AI matrix in place and activated it. The lights dimmed as an enormous amount of power was routed to the device. Axel had played a video of him working in front of Miranda to keep her occupied, while he worked. This had become a common occurrence for him to distract Miranda from what he was doing and to keep her attention elsewhere, because whenever he tried to give her to someone else, she would just cry for hours. But back to the procedure. The clone's eyes had turned completely white as its neural data was completely uploaded to the AI matrix. After that, a few moments had passed before the image of a male-looking AI had appeared in front of Axel. "Hello, Admiral Woods," said the AI as it identified who Axel was. "It's nice to finally meet you. How about you come up with your own name?" responded Axel. The AI had taken a few seconds before they stated their new name. "How about Omni, as it means all," stated the AI. "Very well, Omni it is," said Axel as he stood in front of the new AI taking in this new creation. Omni, the AI, shimmered with an almost ethereal glow as it processed the new information. It was now self-aware, self-named, and ready for its purpose. "For your purpose I'm sure you know, so there is no need to say it out loud," said Axel. Omni knew his purpose, and because of this he also knew why Axel didn't want him to say it in front of the other two people who were present in the room. "For now, I want you to take it step by step and ensure its success," stated Axel. Omni had nodded and disappeared. In the background he was already working on his purpose while also ensuring the success of other operations. He would essentially be a guiding hand for Axel, an omnipresent companion that could monitor all actions and foresee potential threats. Now was the time to begin executing his plan for a takeover. Axel's strategy would take several years to fully implement, as he would have to engage in multiple battles and secure victories to gain more support. His battle group, consisting of both Marines and ODSTs, would be armed with his latest inventions to prove to the rest of the UNSC that they had the technology and resources to defeat the Covenant. This would raise the question of why these creations weren't available to all soldiers. Chapter 51, Chapter 50. A/N. This is a time skip chapter, so there is not any dialogue, just a summary of events and progression of the story. For the next 6 years, until 2531, Axel had been entrenched in numerous battles throughout the outer colonies. His battle group, having been retrofitted with his latest technology, was granted an undeniable advantage when going up against the Covenant. Omni had managed to spread Axel's name far and wide, ensuring that his deeds were carried across every planet within the UEG. The decision of the UNSC to publicly announce their war against the Covenant in 2527 came as quite a shock to the population. People were bewildered and terrified at the prospect of being at war with extraterrestrial beings. This newfound awareness also triggered a massive recruitment drive within the UNSC, which saw an increase in the number of active service members and the capacity to man an unprecedented number of warships. Desperate times called for desperate measures. The UNSC soon began to utilize any vessel that could be repurposed for war against the Covenant, including older ships, civilian vessels, cargo ships, and even colony ships. This inclusive approach allowed for a vastly expanded fleet that could confront the ever-advancing Covenant forces. In the outer colonies, as the devastation wrought by the Covenant continued to escalate, Axel's popularity skyrocketed. He was credited with saving millions of lives and destroying countless numbers of enemy ships, becoming a symbol of hope for those living on the brink of annihilation. The general population soon began referring to him as the savior of humanity, a title that resonated deeply with the beleaguered colonists. These achievements did not go unnoticed, and Axel was eventually promoted to the rank of Vice Admiral, or 3-star Admiral. With this new role came the command of a brand new fleet, a testament to his unwavering commitment to the cause and his unparalleled abilities as a military strategist. He was now in charge of the Second Fleet, which he immediately had begun to retrofit the ships to his standards. The UNSC had also adopted the use of his technology. The Mark II energy shields were to be equipped on each ship alongside the autocannons. Without delay, the retrofitting process began. Axel's designs were efficiently relayed to the various shipyards across the space colonies, where thousands of engineers and naval crew members worked tirelessly to integrate the new technology into each vessel. Drawing from Axel's tireless research, each ship in the Second Fleet was equipped with Mark II energy shields, capable of absorbing a far greater amount of damage. The autocannons, meanwhile, provided a significant boost in firepower, ensuring that every enemy ship they encountered would be met with equal force. To the Covenant, the autocannons were considered a great threat to their ships, and as a result they had begun to target the autocannons on UNSC ships to get rid of them first. Despite the constant threat of Covenant invasion, morale within the Second Fleet was high. They had faith in their Admiral and his technology, which had proven to give them the edge in the battle repeatedly. Despite millions lost to the Covenant, every officer, every soldier had a glimmer of hope within all the loss. Meanwhile, the whole of humanity looked upon the actions of Axel with a mix of reverence and awe. Gifted with an intellect that dwarfed even the most brilliant minds within the UNSC, he had transformed the UNSC into an effective war machine. Because of this, people like Admiral Parangaski and Admiral Gardner were getting nervous about his widespread influence both within the government and within the UNSC. There was nothing that they could do to stop him, since he never failed to get results. The restless unrest and uncertainty brewed within the highest ranks of the UNSC as Axel's reputation only continued to amplify. The very mention of his name was enough to elicit reactions of either fervent admiration or concealed envy. For those who had doubted him, he had proven them wrong, time and again. Despite his contributions, he also posed a crucial debate among the officials: just how much power should be allocated to one individual, even if they are seemingly invincible? Unstoppable with a brilliance that could outshine even the brightest stars, and armed with an arsenal of innovation, Axel had become the linchpin that held together human faith in their ability to fight an overwhelmingly powerful enemy. But his growing influence was stirring uncertainty among various political officers. And this only increases as the UNSC has effectively taken control and now acted as the emergency governing body for humans. But, on the front lines, these political machinations meant little to Axel's fleet. Their sole focus remained on defending humanity from the Covenant threat and saving as many lives as possible. Each ship that was retrofitted had their confidence grow as they started to feel invincible with the new technology. Even though it wasn't true, it kept the morale high among the various battle groups and fleets. Venturing into battle seemed less daunting now. And with each victory won, each planet saved from Covenant invasion, faith in Axel's technology and strategic prowess only solidified further. His credentials were never a question among his crew, they considered themselves fortunate to serve under him. Back at UNSC headquarters, whispers began circulating about a subtle shift in power dynamics. Rumors began to permeate about Axel being considered for a more centralized role, one that would grant him direct oversight into major strategic decisions and even control over vital resources. A position that could potentially consolidate his already formidable influence, a notion that was met with disgruntlement and apprehension by some of the high-ranking officials. The Commander-in-Chief of the UNSC, Fleet Admiral Gardner, found himself in the eye of this storm. He was originally against any promotion for Axel, but he had slowly started to recognize the fact that it's what they needed. But the thought of such concentration of power was unsettling. He admired Axel's genius and respected his contributions, but he also understood the dangers of unchecked authority, especially in times of war when fear could breed irrational decisions. Meanwhile, Axel continued to relentlessly lead his fleet into battle after battle against the Covenant forces. His strategic brilliance combined with the superior firepower and improved defenses of his ships consistently pushed back enemy advances. The savior of humanity, as he was now known, seemed impervious to defeat. His reputation soared even higher with each victory, further solidifying his status as a heroic figurehead. And he wasn't the only one, as the Spartans had begun to make their name known too. John 117 had been force-promoted to Master Chief Petty Officer following his contributions to the war effort, but mainly so UNSC Marines and drop troopers would obey his orders. He was recognized as a major asset to the war, and he needed to have some form of power to command those under him to change the course of the battle. Besides Axel, there were many rising heroes within the UNSC such as Admiral Cole, Captain James Gregory Cutter, Sergeant John Forge, Staff Sergeant Avery Johnson, etc. It was just that Axel had overshadowed these other heroes, still they were heroes that were awarded and commended for their efforts. It was a time of rising heroes and changing politics. Chapter 52, Chapter 51. 2531 March 1, Axel was currently above Algolese, on board his brand new capital ship, the UNSC Emperor of War. It was in reference to Axel's long track record of victories during the war and his popularity amongst the people. The Second Fleet had been split up into various battle groups led by their respective commanders, while Axel remained in charge of Battle Group Tango, which had added 6 more ships to the battle group. One of them was his new capital ship, which was the Punic-class supercarrier, 2 of them were the Marathon-class heavy cruiser, another 2 were the Phoenix-class colonial support vessel, and the last one was a Hillsborough-class heavy destroyer. Axel's new capital ship, the Punic-class supercarrier, was retrofitted with large autocannons, a twin core which offered more power to the energy shielding, a pair of a CR-01D Series 6 Supermax, Archer missile pods, Howler missile pods, and point defense guns to defend against enemy fighters. It's also capable of mounting frigates or small destroyers in its ventral subvessel hangar bays. The hangar was upgraded to carry 190 dropships of multiple variety, 2 air wings, 60 fighters each, and 4 sub-level deployment bays. The Marathon-class heavy cruiser is nearly 1.2 kilometers long, heavily armored and equipped with 2 MACs, and the missiles were replaced with autocannons to significantly improve firepower. They could also be deployed as a light carrier configuration if needed. Additionally, the heavy cruiser also had a complement of Marines, ODST, Spartans, longswords, and dropships. Multiple combatant commands worked together on board the cruiser to ensure ground and space operations were successful. Next was the Phoenix-class colonial support vessel. It was originally a colony ship used to bring colonists to newly settled worlds and create prefabricated colony starter units, hydroponics, and other facilities. Now it was retrofitted to carry vehicles, troops, and supplies as support for ground operations. In addition, it now carried the resources to set up fire bases to establish a strong base on planetary surfaces. It was equipped with 3 MACs, autocannons, and point defenses. Lastly was the Hillsborough-class heavy destroyer. Unlike the frigates, the Hillsborough does not split up the hull booms, but instead has them connected to form one large blocky structure, coated in 2 meters of titanium A battle plate. The Hillsborough also lacks the wings characteristic of the frigate lines and has a less extreme horizontal profile as a result. It had a single MAC, autocannons, Ares missiles, and point defense weapons. So in total he had 12 ships in his battle group, including the original 6, which consisted of 1 Halcyon light cruiser, 2 frigates, 2 Gorgon-class heavy destroyer, and the Axel's former capital ship, the Epic-class heavy carrier. On board the Emperor of War, a section of the ship was turned into Axel's personal lab, where he could continue to develop new designs for various military vehicles and equipment such as the Pelican, Warthog, Falcon, Longsword, etc. At the same time, his previous creations, the new infantry armor, ODST armor, the Nightfall multipurpose rifle, and the orbital defense platform. The UNSC Security Council had voted on its production following the increase in number of lives lost in the war against the Covenant. But because it was Axel's technology, they had to get his permission to give production contracts to other contracted companies to produce them. Not only would the way the technology was created be shared, but the resources used to make it and its abilities. It was not something that Axel really cared about, especially if they tried to create something better than Axel's armor, since the energy shielding technology was a military-exclusive technology that could only be produced by the UNSC. The contracted companies were only in charge of creating the armor, while the energy shielding would be installed by the UNSC itself once they receive the armor. This way it won't fall into the wrong hands, nor would it be replicated by another company. Outer colonies that had not been evacuated or glassed yet had an orbital defense station built in orbit of the planet to defense against Covenant attacks. A single defense station was strong enough to take out a Covenant cruiser with 2 shots, and a Covenant corvette with a single shot. Anything larger than a cruiser had not yet been tested in a live battle, but through simulations it was predicted to take at least 5 shots for Covenant carriers, and 4 for Covenant destroyers. The survival rate of ODSTs had also improved dramatically thanks to their new armor, making quick deployments more effective, and special operations more successful. His creations had been saving lives on the battlefield and making the fight even with the Covenant. Still though, the Covenant was a tough opponent on the ground and in space. As of now, if the Covenant utilized a massive fleet to attack colony after colony, then they wouldn't be able to do anything about it besides slow them down. They were only winning now because of how spread out the Covenant forces were, and whenever they fought the Covenant, they usually outnumbered them and had equal firepower. Speaking of the Covenant, Axel had managed to acquire an intact Covenant corvette, but utilizing his Spartans to take control of the ship. It was a tough battle for the Spartans, as they had to fight through the entire ship to get to the bridge. They couldn't even take prisoners as the Covenant fought them till the end, and those that managed to stay alive had utilized escape pods and retreated to another Covenant ship. Researchers from Section 3 had begun studying the Covenant ship, trying to figure out the difference in their technology and engineering. Axel had studied the Covenant's energy shielding technology and had gotten new insights to make a new energy shield, and he also studied their pinch fusion reactors, which he found out replicated the conditions inside the core of a star to generate enormous amounts of plasma and power. To create his own would take time, but it was doable, and it would become a new source of power for UNSC ships and humans. At the same time, Miranda had grown to the age of 6. She had occasionally spent time with Katherine at the secret research lab while he was in battles. And he would return every few days or so to spend some time with her and teach her as the years passed. She had shown signs of high intelligence at an early age and enjoyed spending time with him more than her mother. She enjoyed her mother and didn't dislike being with her, but she enjoyed her time spent with Axel, as she had the most fun and learned a lot of things. But now she was attending school on Earth away from both her parents. They would occasionally visit her every week when they were free to spend some quality family time, but Miranda wished she could see them every day. Chapter 53, Chapter 52. 4 years ago, 2527. On the Covenant world of Maluruk, the High Prophet of Regret had traveled there seeking out a savage and cunning commander to name Arbiter. This decision of his had come at the continuous failures of Covenant attacks against some human colonies. And, because of heavy human presence on the world of Harvest which they had previously glassed before. As his ship landed, Regret and his honor guard had proceeded towards the Weeping Shadows of Sorrow, which is a maximum security penitentiary for Sanghaili. As Regret walked in, he proceeded towards a certain cell where a very interesting Sanghaili was being kept. His name is Ripa Marami, the Savage. Regret stood in front of his cell as the Sanghaili came and kneeled in front of him. He then started to ask him various questions to ensure that he was still loyal to the Great Journey. After a few minutes of speaking to him, Regret could see that he was indeed still loyal to the Great Journey. And given his record, he would be perfect for Regret to recruit so that he can have an agent of his own to name Arbiter and advance his personal plans. "You shall be pardoned for your crimes, and you will become the 17th Arbiter," stated Regret as the cell opened and Ripa Marami, the new Arbiter, had followed Regret back to his ship. Ripa Marami, now Arbiter, was given command of the fleet of Glorious Interdiction, a Sanghaili-led force formalized by the Prophet of Regret. The fleet consisted of 2 Ket-pattern battlecruisers and 2 Synopsis-pattern heavy destroyers. It took some convincing, but the other prophets had agreed with the appointment of the new Arbiter, to deal with the rising human threat which had been resisting their attempts at purging the entire race. Now in 2531, on Harvest, Covenant forces had attacked a UNSC fortress numerous times and failed. After the recent attack, which was almost successful, they had found out that it was a Forerunner vault which led underground. Upon hearing this, the High Prophet of Regret, who is obsessed with the Forerunners, wanted to know what was in this vault. Allowing the humans to remain in control of this was non-negotiable. The Arbiter was instructed to take back this holy relic from the humans and find out its purpose. Above Harvest, the fleet of Glorious Interdiction had exited slipspace, which immediately alerted the defending UNSC ships. 2 Halcyon light cruisers and a single Gorgon-class heavy destroyer had formed a battle group to patrol above Harvest. Once they detected the Covenant exiting through slipspace, the Admiral leading the battle group had ordered them to engage. On the bridge of the leading Halcyon light cruiser, Admiral Richard Fowler, a seasoned veteran from countless battles with the Covenant, watched grimly as the glow of the enemy's hull took form in the silent blackness of space. His weathered hand tightened around the grip of his command chair. "Prepare to engage and send out a communication to the surface and to Admiral Cole that Harvest is under attack," he ordered, his voice steel-clad and resonating authority. The 2 cruisers and Gorgon-class destroyer fell into formation, as their Mac cannons readied for charge. Back on the Covenant flagship, Arbiter Reborn stood imposingly on the elevated command platform, staring out at the rapidly approaching human vessels. His dual mandibles curled into a grin as he watched the human vessels turn to fight them. "Launch fighters," he commanded in a low growl. "Engage those human vessels directly. We shall not let them stand between us and our objective." A swarm of Seraph fighters spiraled out from both battlecruisers, followed by menacing waves of Phantoms and Banshees, lighting up space with their blue plasma trails while forming an offensive line between their capital ships and the human ships. The first salvos of fire were traded between both sides as beams of red-hot plasma seared through space, clashing against the shields of the human vessels. Admiral Fowler's eyes narrowed as he watched the plasma projectiles collide against the shields of his ships. "Return fire," he ordered, and the human fleet complied. The Mac cannons fired in unison, accelerating towards the Covenant ships. The ship's autocannons targeted the closest Covenant ship, which was one of the 2 Synopsis-pattern heavy destroyers. At the same time, the Covenant heavy destroyer returned fire, targeting the UNSC destroyer. "Evasive maneuvers," barked the captain of the destroyer, his voice echoing sharply in the command deck, but his order came too late. The plasma torpedo struck, its impact shaking the entire ship. The ship's shields sputtered under the onslaught before finally collapsing, and the destroyer staggered. On board the Covenant flagship, Arbiter Reborn watched with satisfaction as the human vessel wavered under the Covenant's firepower. With ruthless precision, he gave another command to his own forces. "All ships focus fire on the human destroyer. Neutralize it." The Covenant fleet directed their fire at the destroyer. The destroyer attempted to initiate invasive maneuvers, but it was not fast enough. As a result, its shields had failed and the plasma had crashed into it, tearing through its hull like it was made of paper. Back on his ship, Admiral Fowler watched helplessly as his vessel buckled under the sustained Covenant assault and was finally engulfed in an explosion as its reactor core was hit. The force of the blast shook even Fowler's cruiser, forcing him to grip tightly onto his chair. "On my order," he commanded in a voice filled with pain and anger, "target that Covenant flagship and fire everything we've got." The surviving Halcyon light cruisers turned around until their Mac cannons were aimed directly at the Covenant flagship. "Fire!" Admiral Fowler barked, and twin trails of superheated tungsten raced from the human ships toward the Covenant flagship. On the Arbiter's ship, the alarms blared in warning as the human vessels hurled their desperate retaliation. Reborn watched as the 2 sluggishly moving projectiles raced towards his ship. "Brace for impact!" he roared, his voice echoing on the vast bridge. The Mac rounds impacted against the flagship's shields with a massive discharge of energy, causing it to shudder violently. The shield struggled to hold, wavering under the immense kinetic force unleashed upon it. Despite their strength, Mac rounds were never designed to crack through energy-shielded vessels, they were made to penetrate hulls of unshielded ships. In response, Reborn barked at his subordinates. "Return fire! Concentrate all firepower on those cruisers. Bring them down!" Covenant plasma torpedoes streaked through space and slammed into one of the Halcyon light cruisers. The firepower of 2 Covenant battlecruisers and 2 Covenant heavy destroyers was just too much for the 2 Halcyon light cruisers. The energy shields held on until the final plasma torpedo hit the cruiser. The vessel's shield flickered and then failed, dissolving into a dazzling array of sparks before sputtering out, leaving the ship vulnerable to the second volley of plasma torpedoes. "Initiate the jump to warp speed," ordered Admiral Fowler as the two cruisers began to fire up their warp drive to jump away. But the plasma torpedoes were faster than the warp drive and had hit their target, causing massive internal explosions that breached several hull locations. "Admiral, we can't jump to warp speed, or the ship will collapse because of hull breaches," stated one of the bridge officers. Admiral Fowler analyzed the situation and there was nothing else to do but fight till the end. "If we can't jump, then everybody gets to the escape pods," stated Admiral Fowler as he stayed behind with the onboard AI and fired all weapons. The two Halcyon light cruisers fired their remaining weapons at the Covenant ships while the crew ran for the escape pods. The autocannons had done their job and managed to penetrate the shields of the Covenant heavy destroyer, but a few minutes later the next volley of plasma torpedoes had penetrated the hull of the cruisers. Only a small number of crew managed to make it to the escape pods before the ships blew up. The escape pods headed towards the surface of the planet while the Covenant fleet moved into position above the planet. In the next few minutes transport ships were launched from the Covenant fleet heading for the surface of the planet. Once again Harvest was being invaded. Prelude to next chapter. Admiral Cole receives word about the attack on Harvest and assembles his own battle group of 10 ships to prevent Harvest from being lost for a second time. As a result of the recent stalemate in the war and the more lives being lost, some high-ranking officers are demanding a change in leadership. The Covenant has not been able to find the location of the human homeworld and will start to try and capture every human vessel they encounter to learn of its location to try and end the war. Amongst the Covenant forces, a name has started to go around regarding a certain human admiral who is known as a god of war, mainly because anybody that encounters his fleet never lives to tell the tale. Chapter 54, Chapter 53. On the surface of Harvest, UNSC forces found themselves under attack. Covenant forces, all over the planet. In the northern part of the planet where the Forerunner vault was located, Covenant forces had converged on that location attempting to overwhelm the defending UNSC forces. Among the UNSC forces was Spartan Team Black. It was composed of 4 Spartans, Margaret 053 the leader, Roma 143 the intelligence specialists, Otto 031 the heavy weapons specialists, and Victor 101 who was team sniper/recon specialists. They reported directly to ONI and was assigned to escort a civilian consultant by the name of Ellen Anders as she investigates the Forerunner vault. She was hired by Admiral Parangaski to see what exactly Axel had seen when he came down here, but so far none of the Forerunner consoles respond to anything she does. From her research, she already discovered that the consoles were active, but she couldn't get anything from them. So, she could only spend her time trying to figure out what she was doing wrong. Meanwhile, at this time outside of the Forerunner vault, the UNSC Marines were defending the base from the Covenant attack. Spartan Team Black was at the forefront of the defense alongside Sergeant Forge. Margaret was on a turret emplacement firing at the advancing Covenant forces with 2 Marines on her side covering her flanks and reloading the turret when needed. Roma was fighting alongside Otto with Sergeant Forge and the Marines. The Covenant forces were relentless, wave after wave attacked the team as Roma and Otto held their ground. Otto's heavy machine gun roared in a ceaseless stream of bullets that obliterated everything in its path. Roma, nimble and efficient with her assault rifle, cutting down the Covenant forces one by one. Meanwhile, Victor had secured a vantage point high up on a rocky cliff, his sniper scope aimed on the battlefield below. His heart was steady, each beat in sync with the rhythm of his breathing. He watched the chaos from above through the scope of his sniper. Every shot he made was precise, taking out key targets within the enemy ranks and disrupting their formation. But even with all of this, the Covenant forces had come prepared. 4 Wraith tanks rushed forward until they had the base in their range and started to fire their plasma mortars at the defensive line. Sergeant Forge, seeing this, ordered them to pull back to avoid the plasma leaving the front lines defenseless. Roma and Otto had retreated while covering their backs to make sure the Marines didn't get shot while trying to flee. A few seconds later, in front of them where they were previously standing, the entire area was hit by plasma mortar that would have killed them if they did not. Margaret, who had to abandon the turret she was using, had walked up to the sergeant who was issuing orders to his men. "Sergeant Forge, we need to retreat, we won't be able to hold off this many enemy forces without running out of ammo." Sergeant Forge turned his head to look at Margaret. "3 Pelicans from Charlie base are en route to evacuate us, we won't be able to hold this position and they can't send us back up, so instead they sent us Pelicans to take us back to Charlie base until we get reinforcements," stated Sergeant Forge. "Copy that, Sergeant. In the meantime we will go and distract the Covenant, let us know when the Pelicans arrive so we can get a ride out of here, responded Margaret. I'll be the first, said Sergeant Forge, good luck out there. Margaret turned towards her team. All right, here's the plan, we are going to destroy those Wraith tanks, so the Pelicans won't get blown up when they land. Otto, I want you to take control of one of them and cause some damage to the Covenant forces. Copy that, responded Otto as he checked his heavy machine gun to see if he had enough ammo for the fight. Roma, I want you to take the second Wraith tank while I take the third, and Victor, you will support us on the ground, said Margaret. This is going to be fun, replied Roma. Make sure it stays that way, Margaret shot back. Everyone geared up. Nods and affirmatives came from the team as they prepared to move out. Their mission was clear, take out the Wraith tanks before they turn the base into a smoldering ruin. Victor quietly moved, positioning himself at a higher vantage point, his eyes locked onto the battlefield beneath him. He watched his team's movements, his trigger finger ready. The first shot rang out, hitting a Sanghaila major who was manning one of the Wraith tank's turrets. The Covenant soldier fell over as he was still clutching the controls of the tank's turret. Margaret and Otto charged forward to capitalize on Victor's opening shot, ignoring the grunts and jackals who shot at them. Their powerful Mjolnir-powered assault armors made them formidable tanks in their own rights. With a powerful leap, Margaret was on top of her target, ripping open its hatch and dispatching its operator with ruthless efficiency. Otto followed suit, launching himself at the second Wraith tank. He landed hard onto its smooth shell, gripping onto it as he wrestled open the hatch. Roma, who was behind the two, provided cover fire against the Covenant forces that tried to intervene. Her assault rifle barked in rapid succession as she cut down grunts and jackals attempting to rush her teammates. Finally gaining access to his chosen tank, Otto engaged in a swift but brutal melee fight with the operator inside before taking control of the Covenant tank. Now that the tanks were under their control, they turned them on the Covenant forces and opened fire on them. The tank that Roma was supposed to get had retreated behind enemy lines, so she mounted up with Otto on the tank's turret and started lighting the Covenant up. Meanwhile, back at the vault, the three Pelicans had come into sight and would not wait too long for them to board before leaving because of how hot the landing zone was. Spartan Team Black, the Pelicans are 3 mics out, so if you want to ride, you better get back here, said Sergeant Forge over his COMM link. Margaret responded, copy that, Sergeant, we are on our way. As she said this, 3 streams of a charged plasma cannon had struck the tank, disabling its shields in seconds. Margaret jumped out of the tank just in time as in the next few seconds it exploded. Facing the new threat, Margaret had seen a new type of Covenant vehicle which looked like a spider tank of sorts. Black team, let's move back to the base, shouted Margaret over the COMM link. Roma and Otto had jumped out of their tank as they saw what happened to Margaret's tank and didn't want to face a similar fate. The Spartans had dashed back towards the base, leaving behind the Covenant forces who were steadily advancing. Once they made it back to the base, the Pelicans were just getting loaded up with Marines, joined by Ellen Anders, who was forced to leave her lab. Otto grabbed a rocket launcher he saw on the ground and found that it was still loaded. He then boarded one of the Pelicans alongside his team. Once the last Marine was on board, the Pelicans took off. But the Covenant forces were right there and had seen them, causing one of the spider tanks to target the Pelicans. Otto had expected this and had aimed at the spider tank with his rocket launcher. A second later, when he had a lock on, he fired the shot which hit the spider tank and destroyed it in a single shot. The remaining Covenant forces focused on the vault while ignoring the fleeing humans. Their main objective was to secure the vault, and they had completed it. Fighting all over the planet had resulted in hundreds of lives already being lost as the UNSC tried to resist the Covenant forces on the planet's surface. At the same time, above the planet, Admiral Cole and his battle group had arrived within the system. His main objective was to take back Harvest and provide support to the troops on the surface. Chapter 55, Chapter 54. I have collected all of the relevant data, sir, and we now have all we need to implement a takeover, said Omni. What do we have so far on the two of them, asked Axel. Omni brought up a bunch of data which included emails, voice recordings, and videos which showed some of the things that they had done. For Admiral Parangaski, we have gathered her saying things regarding spending lives to save the many and sacrificing entire colonies to learn more about the Covenant. One such instance was during the Battle of Chi Seti 4, where Parangaski worked alongside the commander on the ground to test the capabilities of the Covenant army, which resulted in thousands of lives lost, stated Omni. Axel scrolled through the list of things, which was more than enough to pin Admiral Parangaski as unfit for duty and expending her power to waste human lives on gathering information on the enemy. While some might agree with her methods, the people and hundreds of thousands of people within the UNSC would not agree with her methods, which wasted thousands of lives. On the other hand, Admiral Gardner had allowed her to do this by not interfering, and his position as the chairman has not been exactly peaceful. Many people who challenged his authority and ability have either disappeared or been put in prison on false charges, explained Omni. Even recently some officers have been court-martialed after speaking out against the actions of the UNSC during the early stages of the war. Though these officers have been shut up, there is still evidence if you dig deep enough, finished Omni. Nice, this should be more than enough, said Axel, as all the information so far enough to cause some problems in the upper echelons. His allies within the UNSC have expanded over the years. That plus his popularity amongst the soldiers would make his rise to power easy. Within the Security Council, everybody besides Admiral Gardner, Admiral Parangaski, and Admiral Jackson the CNO was an active supporter of his rise to power. General Black, UNSC Marine Corps, General Stone, UNSC Air Force, and General Graham, UNSC Army, were all still part of the UNSC Security Council, and they had all slowly became supporters of Axel in the beginning of the war. In the beginning, from 2525 until now 2531, saw a rise in officers supporting Axel. Mainly because of the new younger officers who began to rise in the ranks, and the older officers began to retire due to old age, injuries, or other health-related matters. Each one of the generals for each branch was made aware of the plan and fully supported it. One, because of a growing divide within the UNSC Security Council, and on the other hand was that Axel had the support of the majority within the UNSC and almost all humans on each planet. So, on June 2, 2531, the data against the two of them were leaked and broadcasted to every human planet. And then once the media companies got their hands on the information, they continued to spread it, which caused some major protests on Earth and a few inner colonies. The information had reached so far that within 12 hours Earth and the inner colonies had seen massive protests at UNSC facilities calling for vengeance for their loved ones who were lost because of a test conducted by the UNSC. On June 3, 2531, a general meeting of the UNSC Security Council was called by Admiral Gardner, which is exactly what Axel wanted. All members were required to attend to discuss a rising problem within the UNSC and major development. The atmosphere was tense as the attendees assembled, whispers and hushed conversations bubbling beneath the surface. Of course, they were all faking it as they knew what was about to happen next. As Admiral Gardner took the podium, a hush fell over the assembled room. Admirals, generals, he began. The recent information which has surfaced against me, and Admiral Parangaski, is fake, stated Admiral Gardner, trying to lie and make things clear. Admiral Gardner continued to speak with conviction, determined to sway the room. The false information was deliberate, meant to drive us apart and distract us from our mission. If we succumb to these fabrications, we risk losing the war due to infighting. I have a suspicion of who is behind this, stated Admiral Parangaski, taking a sip from her cup. It must be Admiral Woods. He's the only one with the capability to orchestrate something of this magnitude. But I'm sure you all knew that, didn't you? General Black was the first to stand up amongst the attendees. Indeed, you are right, Admiral Parangaski. As if on cue, a squad of Marines burst through the doors. Admiral Gardner stood up from his seat in disbelief while Admiral Parangaski took another sip from her cup. Next to Admiral Gardner was Admiral Jake Jackson, who stood up as well. What is this? He questioned. It has been determined that the two of you and your plans are costing us in the long run. Wasting UNSC soldiers' lives and causing their families to suffer is not what the UNSC stands for, nor will I allow it to continue, stated General Black. The other attendees had all stood up in agreement, as this was the plan from the start. You're all traitors! Yelled Admiral Gardner as a massive vein showing his frustration popped up on the side of his head. This has never happened in the history of the UNSC. How can you accuse them based off fabricated claims that have yet to be verified? Cried out Admiral Jackson. Men, arrest the three of them, ordered General Black as the Marines moved in. Arrest the three of them. Admiral Gardner and Jackson tried to resist, but they were no match against the Marines. Admiral Parangaski just stood up and accepted her fate. She knew when she had lost, so she didn't try to resist, as it was too late to run. She didn't regret what she did, nor would she go back and change her decision. What was done, and there is nothing that can be done about it. After the general meeting was over, it was announced that the two of them were arrested and would be trialed for the evidence stacked against them. In the meantime, a new chairman would be chosen in the coming week to replace Admiral Gardner. At the same time, a new CNO would be chosen to replace Admiral Jackson. Meanwhile, Axel was selected as the temporary head of ONI until his position became official. Though this appointment would turn out to be not so temporary after a while. His position as the chairman was also already decided by the UNSC Security Council, they were just waiting a week for things to blow over and the population to calm down. It was a new time for humans as a new era was about to usher in with them at the forefront. Chapter 56, Chapter 55. A week later, after the arrest of Admiral Gardner, Admiral Parangaski, and Admiral Jackson, Axel was chosen as the new chairman of the UNSC. He had been voted in unanimously by the other Security Council members. On June 11, 2531, Axel had arrived on Earth in Sydney, Australia and was to make his way towards the UNSC headquarters. But instead of taking the direct route and landing at the main building, Axel had taken a detour instead. He had heard that there were hundreds of thousands of people gathered for his arrival within the city, which caused a lot of problems considering the UNSC had put each world under martial law. Army soldiers were deployed throughout the city to ensure that it remained a peaceful gathering. However, at the same time Axel planned to use this opportunity to draw out those who still opposed him. It was a plan that Omni had come up with to draw out any remaining opposition and secure his position. As they landed on a designated pad far from headquarters, Axel stepped off the ship and into a waiting armored vehicle. The crowd, stretching as far as he could see, was cordoned off by soldiers in full gear. They roared with enthusiasm as Axel's vehicle moved towards them. Omni had quietly infiltrated all communication channels of known dissenters, actively listening for chatter amongst those who opposed Axel's new appointment as chairman. As Axel's convoy slowed, he decided to address the masses before proceeding further. He stepped out of the armored truck despite the commander's protests. A drone was hovering above recording Axel, displaying the video across every world. "How's everyone doing today?" asked Axel, hoping to keep things simple. "Today marks a new era for the UNSC and for humanity," Axel continued. "The previous leaders of the UNSC had abused their power and caused innocent lives to be lost in order to gain information on the enemy," said Axel. In a tactical aspect it was not a bad move, but in the long run it gave Axel exactly what he needed to take them down. "Your sons and daughters are eagerly fighting the Covenant and risking their lives to help evacuate colonists within the outer colonies. They should not be sacrificed when we have already lost hundreds of thousands of people in the war already." Axel's voice had taken a more serious tone. "I give you my word that as long as I am chairman, I will do everything within my power to protect every son, daughter, mother, father, aunt, uncle, etc. We weren't the ones to start this war, but I can guarantee that we will finish it." Loud cheering erupted from the crowd at the end of his words. Within the crowd a group of people had made to the front where the UNSC soldiers were standing, making sure no one got past. One of the people had reached within their coat and placed their hand on a gun which was hidden within their clothes. The other members spread out into various places surrounding the convoy. But as they were walking through the crowds their numbers had started to fall. This was because Axel had embedded agents within the crowd that Omni coordinated with to spot and take out threats before they have the chance to act. Also, around the surrounding buildings snipers were placed in various places for extra security. Meanwhile Axel continued talking to the crowd. "We will maintain law and order but in a manner that respects each individual's rights. Martial law is a shield, not a weapon to instill fear. We must continue fighting for those that are no longer able to fight, and with me at the forefront we will defeat these aliens and show them the strength of humans." As Axel stepped back into the armored vehicle, the crowd roared its approval even louder than before. Omni continued to coordinate with the embedded agents to take out the dissenters within the crowd. As they made their way through the city streets heading towards UNSC headquarters, Axel looked out onto the bustling city. Now that he was at the top of everyone else, it was time to start truly reshaping the UNSC into an immovable weapon. Once he arrived at the UNSC headquarters, he was escorted inside where the UNSC Security Council was gathered and was clapping their hands. "Congratulations, Admiral Woods, on your new appointment," voiced some of them members as he walked by them. Within the room he had seen a familiar face, Fleet Admiral Ross, the former chairman of the UNSC who was currently holding the temporary position as the Chief of Naval Operations. Axel walked up to him and shook his hand as Admiral Ross smiled warmly at him. "Congratulations Admiral Woods on your new position. With you at the top the UNSC is going to be ushered into a new era and the current conflict will hopefully be dealt with," stated Admiral Ross. "Of course, Admiral, my goal is to secure humanity's right to survive in the universe by overcoming the Covenant threat," responded Axel. "I thought as much," said Admiral Ross as a soldier had walked up and presented him with a small case. Admiral Ross opened the case and presented what was inside of it to Axel. "I would also like to congratulate you on your new promotion to Fleet Admiral." Admiral Ross had pinned the 5-star Admiral rank onto Axel's uniform. This was a big moment for Axel as not only had he reached the top in terms of position, but he also now outranks everybody in rank besides the other fleet admirals. But his position as chairman held more power than a fleet admiral, as he now oversaw the entirety of the UNSC. Everybody in the room started to clap about his new appointment and congratulate him. After that everybody had took their seats, with Axel taking the central seat. "Well, now we are seated, let's officially begin this meeting to fill in the empty positions," stated Axel. "First, for the Chief of Naval Operations, I say we keep Admiral Ross and make him the permanent CNO, as he is the most senior enlisted naval officer, and he has years of experience." The other members agreed with this, as he had a lot of experience, and he was previously chairman before Admiral Gardner. Seeing that everybody agreed, Axel moved on to the next thing. "Next, I will make myself the official head of the Office of Naval Intelligence, ONI, to ensure that I hold some form of senior naval position besides chairman." Unlike with the CNO appointment, this suggestion did not sit well with some members such as General Stone and General Graham. Axel respected their opinion and concerns, but still went through with it anyway, while assuring them that it was needed for the future of the UNSC. After that they went over a few other matters regarding the implementation of the MCU within the UNSC military. The Misrai armory robots had proved to cost them in long run, as thousands were destroyed by the Covenant without even being able to halt the Covenant advance on multiple fronts. So as of now the MCUs would once again start being produced by the UNSC. Axel has also introduced some new vehicles for all branches to use to replace the current ones. These vehicles were designed to cost more than the current ones, but their capabilities would save lives on the battlefield and allow a wide range of operations to take place. A/N Images regarding the new inventions will be showed in the next chapter, and you are more than willing to comment your own vehicles that you would like to see added. This was all he presented at this meeting, as they had things to do and there was still a war going on. But he had many more ideas regarding new ships, improved ACE, etc. He also wanted to start creating the Spartan 3 program to allow for more Spartans to be created. As of now there were less than 500 Spartans, which is why he didn't create a department for them, but once their numbers increase then he would create such a department. The last thing he wanted to create was the enhancements that a space marine had. They were effectively killing machines which walked on the corpses of their enemies and brought victory to mankind within the 40K universe. If he created something like that, then his position would be absolute for centuries to come. Why centuries, you ask? Well, he also planned to increase his lifespan, or at least decrease the aging process. If he could implement this among even civilians, then he would be worshipped as a living god and he would have a strong army with decades of experience. There are thousands of things that Axel could create simply from his memory that could be created. But first, to be able to build all these creations, he would need resources. And to do that he would need to create a massive megastructure to harness the resources of an entire planet to provide the resources he needed. He had the power now, all he needed to do was implement it. Chapter 57, Chapter 56. A week earlier, above Harvest, Admiral Cole's fleet had engaged the Covenant's fleet of glorious interdiction. On the UNSC side, Admiral Cole had assembled 10 ships consisting of 4 frigate-class ships, 2 light carrier-class ships, 3 light cruisers, and 2 destroyers. Once the battle began, the frigates were the first targets of the Covenant fleet, and they didn't last long under heavy fire from the Covenant battlecruisers and heavy destroyers. Admiral Cole focused fire on the much easier targets, which were the heavy destroyers. On board one of the carriers was a team of Spartans. Admiral Cole sent them to board one of the Covenant heavy destroyers to take it out from the inside. Meanwhile, on the surface, ODSTs were deployed to the surface to reinforce the current ground forces. While the Spartans boarded the Covenant ship, Admiral Cole coordinated with the rest of his fleet to take down the shields of one of the heavy destroyers. With a well-executed precision volley of MAC rounds, the destroyer's energy shield fell, leaving the hull of the ship without protection. The Spartans, by that time, were already deep within the other Covenant destroyer, wreaking havoc. Their goal was to try and take control of the ship. If they were unable to, then they would just destroy it from the inside. The Spartans, led by their squad leader, moved throughout the ship, taking down any opposition in their path. Back on the field of space, Admiral Cole's ships fired their autocannons at the vulnerable heavy destroyer whose shields were down. The heavy destroyer responded by returning fire at the forwardmost ship, which was one of the destroyers. However, by this time the ship's MAC cannons had finished recharging. Admiral Cole ordered another volley against the unshielded Covenant ship. As the MAC rounds hit its target, internal explosions could be seen all over the ship for a few seconds before the ship blew up. The explosion from the Covenant heavy destroyer caused a shockwave to travel through space, rocking all ships in vicinity. The Spartans on board the other heavy destroyer had momentarily lost balance from the shockwave, but soon recovered seconds later. With this engagement, Admiral Cole had lost 3 of his frigates, leaving 1 heavily damaged, and 1 of the destroyers had lost power to its engine, leaving it vulnerable to plasma torpedoes. The situation was dire, but he had been in worse. The Spartans on board the Covenant ship, having sensed the shift in momentum, pressed their assault. Slicing through the alien resistance like a hot knife through butter, they made their way to the heart of the destroyer, the command center. A determined firefight erupted, but with superior tactics and ferocity, the Spartans prevailed, but the Covenant had already rigged the ship to self-destruct, leaving the Spartans with no choice but to fleet the ship. Back in space, Admiral Cole was looking at his tactical screen and had saw an opportunity. The Covenant fleet had spread out to avoid another shockwave from an exploding ship. Admiral Cole ordered his disabled destroyer to engage its emergency thrusters, a one-time burnout maneuver that could send it hurtling towards an enemy ship like a missile. The captain of the destroyer acknowledged this while ordering his crew to get to the ship's escape pods. Once it was reported that all escape pods were away, the captain had the ship's onboard AI pilot into one of the Covenant's battlecruisers. At the same time, on board the boarded heavy destroyer, the Spartans had evacuated the ship before it self-destructed itself. Moments later, the ship exploded, causing another explosion which knocked the damaged frigate off course, causing it to drift in space as it was heavily damaged. By this point, the amount of damage done to his fleet was a lot. One of the carriers was boarded by Covenant pods, while the other destroyer shields had just failed. However, the 2 light cruisers' shields were still up but were on the verge of collapsing. The last remaining Covenant ship, which was the Arbiter's capital ship, had received orders to stall the UNSC ships for a little longer. The ship's acting captain had complied and fired its plasma weapons towards the other destroyer, targeting its weak spots, disabling the ship in an instant. The battle was looking a little close, but Admiral Cole believed that they could claim victory against the battlecruiser. But in the next moment his belief vanished as another group of Covenant ships were detected exiting slip space. Upon seeing this, victory was no longer guaranteed, especially when one of the new Covenant ships was even more massive than the battlecruiser. "All ships jump to warp speed, get out of here," ordered Admiral Cole. They no longer had the tactical advantage, and he wasn't going to waste any lives. They had already picked up the escape pods from the other ships, and the light carrier had successfully defeated the Covenant boarding party. Once Cole gave the order to retreat, every UNSC ship that was operable jumped to warp speed. The only one that couldn't be the destroyer, which had been disabled. But the captain of the ships knew what he needed to do, as Cole had come up with a protocol for situations like these. The captain ordered all crew to escape pods while ordering the ship's onboard AI to self-destruct once the last one was away. Their goal was to prevent the capture of the ship, which would give away the location of Earth, threatening humanity's home world. The Covenant ship which had appeared was a supercarrier, followed by 3 more battlecruisers and a few light cruisers. On board was the Prophet of Regret, who was notified of the vault's capture and wanted to come see for himself what it contained. For now, Harvest had been lost as fighting on the ground intensified between the Covenant and UNSC forces. Meanwhile, a week later, after Axel's new appointment as chairman, it was time for him to start implementing some new military technology to replace current military vehicles, spacecraft, etc. New creations: unmanned multipurpose vehicle, new Orion dropship, new gunship, new light carrier, new destroyer, new battlecruiser, new frigate, new cruiser, new heavy carrier, new multi-role fighter. These designs would be utilized as the future for the UNSC Navy. But to produce them they would need resources, which brings up the next thing that Axel created, which is a massive megastructure to harvest stars called the starlifter. To build just one of them would take around 4 years because of its size, and he would need to gather all the resources to build it. But once it's done, they will not have to worry about a resource shortage anytime soon. Starlifter image. The last thing he needed to create was a powerful new energy source. Luckily, he had Forerunner ships in his possession that scientists and engineers were constantly studying. Recently, in the past months, Katherine and a group of scientists had made a breakthrough in learning about the concept of the energy used within the Forerunner ships. Upon learning of the concept, the monitor had explained to them a more in-department description of how it worked. The energy was called vacuum energy, and it is an underlying background energy that exists in space throughout the entire universe. One contribution to the vacuum energy may be from virtual particles, particle pairs throughout the universe that blink into existence and then annihilate in a time span too short to observe. Vacuum energy originates from the beginnings of infinite numbers of alternate realities. When harnessed for power supply, these fledgling universes are drained of energy in their infancy, resulting in their premature deaths. All Forerunner technology utilized the practically infinitely available vacuum energy as a power source, making possible their myriad of technological marvels. Katherine had sent over this information to him as she herself delved deeper into the new energy source. While Axel began to look over all the information and the details of the new energy source to create it. If he was successful, he would have created a new energy source for humanity that would work for centuries to come and didn't need fuel to be powered. So, for the next few days he would spend that time in lab on Algalese until he created the new energy source. Chapter 58, Chapter 57. Axel had shown the other members of the Security Council the new designs of the replacement vehicles for various vehicles and ships which had received great feedback from them. General Stone, UNSC Air Force, liked the new gunship and dropship which would allow for a broader range of operations. The details on the gunship's capabilities stated its increase in firepower, maneuverability, speed, defense, and it could carry more troops than the Falcon. Next, he looked over the new fighter which was designed as a multi-role fighter. It came in 4 different designs, each one offering a wide range of payloads but still maintained its ability to conduct multi-role missions. It was basically an upgrade from the Longsword as offered improvements across the board. For the dropship, it was just overall better than the Pelican because of its troop capacity. He agreed that the use of the Pelican as a secondary dropship for special operations and such would allow it to continue to be in service if it was upgraded with more advanced technology. I have to say, these designs are unique and offer the chance to improve our military capabilities in the air to contend with Covenant aircraft. I know that your designs offer exactly what they say as you have proven it multiple times, so I think we can put these new designs into production as soon as possible, said General Stone, offering his opinion. Axel nodded, hearing the positive feedback from General Black. Now that he was chairman, his designs were about to reshape the war and turn it into their favor. General Graham, UNSC Army, and General Black, UNSC Marine Corps, both liked the unmanned multipurpose vehicle as it would better protect soldiers' lives on the front lines. Especially since it was an all-around vehicle that could perform in multiple roles, allowing for adaptability on the battlefield, which is what the UNSC needs to overcome the Covenant forces on the ground. Similar to the S-180 Spider tank which you introduced a few years ago, I can see the unmanned multipurpose vehicle transforming the battlefield into our favor and offering our troops on the ground even more support. As of now, our current ground vehicles are effective, but their protection against plasma is not good enough and some Covenant ground vehicles have shields protecting them. General Black offered his opinion on the vehicles. The Spider tank has managed to level the playing field between the Covenant's Wraiths and other heavy vehicles, but we need more variety of vehicles to support our infantry on the ground, said General Graham, as he has first-hand seen how effective the Spider tank is against Covenant Wraiths. Admiral Ross, who is the CNO, offered his opinion on the new ships introduced. In his opinion, they were revolutionary, offering a completely new design to UNSC ships, and combined with new weapons they would increase the UNSC's fighting ability against the Covenant in space. The new ships, I must say, will completely advance the Navy to contend with the Covenant ships. Those autocannons are already extremely effective against the Covenant's shields, but as seen at the last Battle of Harvest, the bigger the Covenant ships, the more powerful their energy shields are. So, if possible, if we can develop better ship-to-ship weapons designed for taking down the Covenant's shields, it would greatly help us in space combat. The MAC cannons are good weapons to use against them, but the recharge time between each shot will give the Covenant the chance to counterattack before we can fire the next round. Admiral Ross stated his opinion on the new ships and the MAC cannons. It's nice that we are actually getting somewhere now, stated Axel, referring to the previous state of the UNSC. But there is something else that we would need to build, said Axel, as the image of the starlifter appeared in the middle of the table. This is what I call the starlifter. It is a massive megastructure, more massive than anything that the UNSC has built before, but its use will completely solve our resource problem, stated Axel, as the other members looked at the massive structure with interests. Is that around a star? Asked General Black. Yes, it is. By harvesting the mass of a star we can produce many forms of matter. For example, iron is something that we can produce with this, and that is just one thing. If my calculations are correct, we will probably be able to produce all types of metals, minerals, and gases from the star. We would also be able to harvest plasma from the star, explained Axel. Admiral Ross looked between Axel and the image of the starlifter to make sure that he was still alive. So what you are saying is that with this we can solve our resource problem, which will allow us to produce thousands of military vehicles and equipment. Not thousands but hundreds of thousands, replied Axel. Admiral Ross didn't know how to react to this technology. To call it revolutionary would be an understatement. This technology would catapult the UNSC into a realm of progress and innovation they had only dreamed of. Well then, Axel, let's not waste any more time. Let's start building this starlifter. The room erupted in murmurs of agreement and intrigue as Axel's holographic display rotated, revealing more angles and details of the massive megastructure. Admiral Ross turned to Axel and asked, "What are the building requirements for such a colossal machine?" Axel replied, "Of course, it would require many materials that are scarce within our current reach. But with the creation of this megastructure, once it's operational, it can produce the very materials it requires for maintenance and further construction." General Black leaned forward in his chair. "This is ambitious beyond anything we've ever done before. The manpower required alone will be immense, not to mention the technology needed to even begin such an endeavor." "Not exactly, General. 300k MCUs would be able to do it within a year, but to produce that many we would have to establish more factories to produce more MCUs. If we can reach that amount within a year, then it will take another year to create the starlifter if we have all the necessary resources." Axel already had a plan in place. While originally, he estimated that it would take 4 years, he wanted to speed things up. Axel also added, "Also, since we all trust each other here and have the same goals, I will tell you about my secret research base that is established on a Forerunner shield world." Axel then began to explain everything that led up to him discovering the shield world and about what he found in it. Once he was done, the other members were more intrigued about the outcome of the research rather than about him establishing a secret research base. "We made the right decision when we decided to support you, Admiral," said General Graham. "I can see a better future for humanity as a whole, and if you keep introducing new technology and learning more about the Forerunners, then the Covenant will not even pose a threat to us come 10 to 20 years, added General Graham. The other members all agreed with this statement, offering their shared agreement. The future of the UNSC was bright with Axel leading it, and they hoped to live long enough to see how it all worked out. With that, the meeting had ended and Axel dismissed all the other members while Admiral Ross wanted to speak with him about the newfound Forerunner dreadnoughts. So, they both walked to his office where they sat down to discuss it. "How powerful are these dreadnoughts?" asked Admiral Ross. Axel replied, "They are extremely powerful. I think just 2 of them could take on 10 Covenant ships, though that is just speculation as they have not actually been tested in battle yet." Admiral Ross nodded while rubbing his chin. "And how many personnel would it take to man just one of these dreadnoughts?" "It would require 1 officer and 15 crew members, but I want to increase that number to prevent problems that would arise with so little crew member on board, so we could say a crew of about 100 people would be good enough," replied Axel. "Interesting," said Admiral Ross, as that number was too little for a ship that is supposed to be powerful enough to make the Covenant fleet look like nothing. "If possible, I would like to see them for myself. Of course, I plan to put you in charge of the training of crew members for the ships, and it would be best if you saw it in person to come up with a good training plan for them," stated Axel. "Excellent," said Admiral Ross as he stood up. "With that, I will take my leave and look forward to seeing the ships in person." They both shook hands before Admiral Ross left his office. Now that he was left alone, Axel would start to plan the creation of more factories to increase the production of MCUs to build the starlifter. These MCUs were no different from the current ones, as one MCU was built to perform multiple roles and have adaptability. Chapter 59, Chapter 58. "This is a disgrace," shouted Arbiter after learning that his fleet had to be saved by the High Prophet of Regret. He was entrusted this mission and all, but his capital ship was destroyed. "It's fine, Arbiter, don't let it get to your head. This battle gave me all the information I need to give a better fleet this time. Humans have some strange new weapon which we have learned to be some form of autocannon that is designed to penetrate our shields," explained Regret. "Is this the result of what they found in this holy relic?" asked Arbiter, referring to the Forerunner vault. "Maybe, maybe not, we don't know for sure, but we can't allow them to keep winning battles like this. So, I talked to the other High Prophets, and they all agreed to send you reinforcements to speed up the human extermination process," announced Regret. "We cannot let these heretics continue to hinder our progress," Regret added with determination. The Arbiter was given a new fleet totaling 15 ships. The reinforcements consisted of 3 battlecruisers, 3 heavy destroyers, 2 light carriers, 3 light cruisers, and 4 frigates. With this new fleet in his hands, he would not allow the humans to get another victory over him. Meanwhile, on the Covenant home world, the High Prophet of Truth was taking advantage of the current situation in the UNSC. While he didn't know what was going on internally, he had managed to make contact with a group of insurrectionists which he planned to use to discover more human worlds to glass. He ordered a group of Kigyar to ally with the humans. After doing so, they began supplying the insurrectionists with Covenant weapons which they gladly took and modified them. The reason the Prophet of Truth did this was so that they could discover the location of Earth from stolen navigation data or through tracking devices in the weapons. At the same time, there had been an increase in insurrectionist activity within the UNSC. The restriction of movement between colonies except for the UNSC had likely fueled their actions. But the number of insurrectionists were insignificant compared to the number of people who had enlisted into the UNSC. Following Axel's new appointment and his speech to that was broadcasted across the UNSC, hundreds of thousands of people had started to sign up to join the UNSC. For Axel, this rise in new recruits had come just at the right time. As new technology was getting introduced, the rise in recruits would ensure that he would have the manpower to utilize these advancements effectively. Many of these recruits were picked based off tests and abilities for OCS school on Earth, while others had chosen their respective branches. Most went to the Marines and the Army, while a good number went to the Navy trying to follow after Axel. The other members of the Security Council were shocked that just one person could pull in this many recruits. Every day their workload had increased because of the new recruits, organizing commands, and coordinating with other branches during operations. Each day that passed, the total amount recruits grew, leaving Axel to face an unexpected challenge. He had the manpower for sure, but training such a large force was a different matter entirely. The UNSC's training facilities were not built to accommodate this surge, and what they needed right now were not mere soldiers, but well-trained, efficient division that could stand against the might of the Covenant. They didn't have the resources to start building new academies and training facilities, as majority of the resources were being transported to the new megastructure project and more factories to produce MCUs. They had already found a suitable non-habitable system to use that didn't have any habitable planet within it. Resources and MCUs were already being transported to the location to start its construction. Production of MCUs had increased to 800 a day, which was the right amount that they needed to reach 300K within a year. So, to come up with a solution to this problem, Axel had instead turned to some of the major military and construction companies. The construction companies would be given contracts to build new military training facilities, while the military companies would be given contracts to produce the new technology that Axel was creating. They would be given the design and data on how to build it, and the UNSC would pay them at a reduced cost because of the ongoing war and because of Axel's manipulation. The companies had previously asked to produce his military creations, but Axel denied them due to what Miss Rye Armory had done with his MCUs. But times were changing, and he needed to balance the UNSC resources carefully until the megastructure is completed. So he offered them contracts to have the rights to produce his creations and sell them to the UNSC at a reduced cost. In exchange they may make their own designs if they can find something better. There was no need for him to worry when he could simply make something better than what they created. As for Miss Rye Armory, they changed their focus from their robots back to military vehicles. They had also given any excess units to Axel to contribute to the production of MCUs. They had lost a lot of money producing their robotic units, and now they wanted to make up for it by shifting their focus back to military vehicles. Axel had begun working with the Security Council to implement new strategies to take on the Covenant. New recruits who were unable to attend the training facilities were given virtual reality training kits. These were designed by technology firms that had hitherto produced video games and home electronics. Distributed to millions of homes throughout the colonies, these VR kits allowed soldiers to partake in a fully immersive military training experience from the comfort of their living rooms. This in no way made up for real training, as while they waited for training facilities to be built, new recruits would utilize VR technology. Once a training facility was ready, they would then be called to attend basic military training for their respective branch. This strategy allowed Axel to not only train more recruits but also introduce them to the state-of-the-art tech they might soon find themselves using on the battlefield. It also saved the UNSC valuable time and resources that could be redirected towards their megastructure project. 4 months later, and Axel was already reaping the benefits of his decision to outsource some production to private companies. New weapon systems and vehicles rolled off assembly lines with greater speed and efficiency than ever before. And although they were produced at a reduced cost, Axel's insistence on strict quality control standards ensured that no compromises were made regarding their performance or durability. Meanwhile, within these 4 months, Arbiter had begun to hop around within the outer colonies, causing trouble for Admiral Cole and his fleet, as the new Covenant fleet was just too powerful for them to handle alone. But it was hard to predict the Covenant attacks, as they would attack a planet, retreat, attack another planet, then come back to the first planet they attacked to launch an invasion. The UNSC fleet was beginning to be spread too thin to combat the Covenant fleet. And Axel had been busy managing the UNSC, organizing operations against insurrectionists, and preparing for the creation of the Spartan 3 project. Recruits were chosen from a wide range of recruits, unlike the Spartan 2s, however there were still certain restrictions placed on new recruits so that not just anybody could become a Spartan. Next was the creation of the gene seed. The gene seed contains genetically engineered viral machines which rebuild the human body according to the biological template contained within it. He had based it off the Space Marine gene seed which he remembered completely transformed a simple human into a superhuman capable of unhuman feats. A separate gene seed was created for the Spartan 2s which Axel wanted to turn them into his own version of a Primaris. But first he would implant himself with the gene seed to see the results. Chapter 60, Chapter 59. For Axel to undergo the gene seed surgery he would have to be absent for at least 6 months. Installing all the organs and machines into his body would take a week. Then another week would be needed to let his body adjust to the new change. After that was the recovery and growth period which would take up the remaining time. The recovery and growth period would be used for Axel's body to recover from being basically immobile for 2 weeks. Next was the growth period which is when the gene seed will start to change his body to that of superhuman. His body will grow to be 7 feet 5 in, his healing ability would be far superior to anything the Covenant has, and not to mention his amplified strength, which would surpass that of his previous Spartan enhancements. The installation of mechanical augmentations such as ocular modifications and brain enhancements would further augment his already elevated abilities. He would become the pinnacle of human evolution and technological advancement combined. Undergoing the gene seed surgery would be a demanding process, physically and mentally. And once done, he would not be the same man he once was. Not that it would change his mind, or the way he thinks. But he would essentially become a titan amongst mortals. So, before he began the surgery Axel had to finish up some last-minute things. He ordered multiple operations to take place over the course of the next months and ensured that the people whom he trusted would carry out their duties. ONI would continue hunting down insurrectionists and preventing internal stability from dropping. Admiral Ross was placed as temporary chairman and would be watched over and provided guidance by Omni whom Axel knew could make sure that if a problem arises that it is dealt with. Next was the new Covenant fleet which has been causing problems in the outer colonies. He couldn't just leave this fleet to harass the UNSC while he was gone, so he went to Trove, the Forerunner shield world to get 2 of the Forerunner dreadnoughts to take on the Covenant fleet. Admiral Ross had people training on how to use the ships for 3 months now and they had become proficient in using the ship's system. Each dreadnought had a crew of 100 people and was commanded by a captain. Additionally, a complement of 2,000 MCUs and dropships were loaded onto each dreadnought to be able to launch ground forces. Axel had gone to Trove and took command of 2 of the dreadnoughts which he took into orbit above the planet. On the bridge of the ship, Axel had plugged in a small device into the AI core which would allow a direct connection between the AI and the ship. Once he plugged the device in, Omni had appeared in front of him. "I must say this ship is impressive," commented Omni as he had just been plugged into the ship's systems. Despite that, it didn't take him long to see the difference in firepower between the Forerunner dreadnought and the most powerful UNSC ship. To compare the two would not even be fair for the UNSC as the Forerunner dreadnought outclassed it in everything. "Well, they do belong to the Forerunners, so I would expect no less," said Axel. "I agree," replied Omni. "Anyway, I'm assuming we are hunting that Covenant fleet?" Axel nodded his head. "Yes we are," answered Axel. The latest reports revealed that they were attacking the planet Al-Kiba in the Alpha Corvi system. This report was half an hour ago, so I suggest we get moving. "Copy that, Admiral." Plotting jump to the Alpha Corvi system, said Omni. "Good," replied Axel, and with a determined expression, he added, "And Omni?" "Yes, Admiral." Omni responded, his holographic form flickering slightly as he stood on top of the tactical display. "Send word to Admiral Ross to initiate Operation Sunburst, just in case we don't make it back in due time." "As you command," Omni replied as he sent the message to Admiral Ross. The Forerunner dreadnought vibrated slightly as its slipstream drive hummed into life. The cosmic fabric of space seemed to warp and weave around them as they made the jump to Al-Kiba. To an onlooker, it would look as if they had disappeared into thin air. They arrived at the Alpha Corvi system within minutes, far faster than anything the UNSC could achieve. Emerging from slip space, the twin dreadnoughts were greeted by the sight of a Covenant fleet presiding over Al-Kiba. Immediately Omni's holographic avatar appeared near Axel. "Admiral," he reported quickly, "scans show 15 Covenant ships surrounding Al-Kiba with some debris from a destroyed UNSC ship. It appears that they have yet to glass the planet." "We've arrived just in time then," said Axel. He was focused on the holographic display showing the entire system. "All hands, prepare to engage the Covenant." Immediately all the crew started to focus on their assigned tasks. Omni had begun preparations as his avatar disappeared as he was fully committed to managing the ship's systems. The Sojourner-class dreadnought was equipped with 28 converging beam cannons, 300 light mass fusillade cannon, and millions of autonomous Despair-class fighters which would be controlled by Omni, as an AI was the only one capable of controlling that many autonomous fighters. Omni had created a dozen subordinate AI programs which would control a portion of fighters, while he would direct them and organize them into groups to coordinate their attack. The Covenant had noticed them and had turned to face them. On board his capital ship, the Arbiter was wondering what type of ship this was in front him. It didn't look like it belonged to the UNSC, but then why would it appear within this exact system above a human world? Arbiter, they are launching fighters, alerted one of the Covenant crew members. Arbiter turned towards the one who spoke with a disgruntled face. Well, launch our own fighters, he said as he turned back to see even more fighters emerging from the two ships. Back on the bridge of one of the Forerunner dreadnoughts, Axel had watched the Covenant movements to see what they were going to do. But so far, they had done nothing. Most likely they were confused as they had never seen a ship like this before. That's what he thought until a few minutes later when the Covenant fired their plasma torpedoes at them. Fire all weapons, ordered Axel. The converging beam cannons are firing, Omni reported. Light mass fusillade cannons are currently targeting enemy ships. The AI programs Omni had created began controlling the autonomous Despair-class fighters, launching them in coordinated attacks against the Covenant fleet. The first volley of converging beam cannons hit their intended targets, obliterating 2 vessels instantly and crippling several others. The light mass fusillade cannons followed suit, releasing barrages of energy that traced lines of destruction across space. On the bridge of his capital ship, the Arbiter watched in stunned disbelief as his fleet crumbled under the fire of just 2 ships. He barked orders to his crew to return fire and launch all fighters, but it seemed like a desperate struggle against a superior foe. Report. Axel demanded from Omni. His gaze remained locked on the holographic display, watching as a few Covenant ships disappeared from the display. The Covenant fleet is scattering, Omni replied. 7 have been destroyed entirely and 5 others are crippled. Axel nodded upon hearing the report. The dreadnoughts completely overwhelmed the Covenant fleet. Full speed ahead, ordered Axel, keeping his eyes on the crumbling Covenant fleet. Take us right through the heart of their formation. Copy that, Admiral, said Omni as the 2 dreadnoughts increased speed. The twin dreadnoughts swooped through the Covenant's scattered and shattered formation. Converging beam cannons continued to release deadly salvos of destruction while their light mass fusillade cannons shredded through any Covenant ship unlucky enough to be in their path. The Despair-class fighters swarmed like a furious cloud of locusts over the enemy fleet, their relentless attacks causing havoc among the already disoriented Covenant forces. On the Arbiter's ship, he didn't want to lose his fleet once again. So, he ordered the retreat. All ships retreat. Axel, who had noticed this, wanted to toy with the Arbiter who had been causing so much trouble for him in the outer colonies. Omni, target all the Covenant ships except for the Arbiter's ship. Omni acknowledged as the dreadnought's weapons started targeting every Covenant ship except for the Arbiter's. Axel knew that if the Arbiter returned with a destroyed fleet, then he would not be trusted anymore. Once the battle was over, only 3 Covenant ships managed to escape while the others were annihilated by the dreadnoughts. Message Admiral Cole and tell him to get some ground troops on Alkiba to deal with the Covenant ground troops. In the meantime, we will send down the MCUs to help them, ordered Axel as Omni carried out his orders. The Covenant fleet was destroyed, and the Arbiter was dealt with. He may not be dead, but he would surely not remain in command of his fleet once the High Prophet of Regret found out about his failure yet again. In the meantime, Axel could begin his gene seed surgery and not have to worry too much about the Covenant as they would start to be cautious going forward.
Thanks for listening.